Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. The company sent me to Indianapolis in early October for a 3-day training seminar on their new inventory system. I'm an assistant manager at a sporting goods store in Ohio, and corporate decided all of us needed hands-on experience with the software before the holiday rush. They booked us at the Travelers Inn off Interstate 70, one of those budget chains where the carpets are permanently stained and the ice machine sounds like a diesel engine. I didn't mind much. After 12-hour shifts on my feet, anywhere with a bed and hot water would do. Plus, I was getting paid overtime just to sit in a conference room and click through PowerPoint slides. The hotel sat between a truck stop and a 24-hour diner, surrounded by warehouses and distribution centers. Not exactly scenic, but I wasn't there for sightseeing. That Tuesday night, I got back to my room around 9:30 after grabbing dinner with some co-workers at the diner next door. Room 118, ground floor facing the parking lot. I remember because I could see my rental car, a white Nissan Altima, parked right outside my window. The room smelled like old cigarettes despite being non-smoking, and the air conditioner rattled like marbles in a tin can. But I was exhausted from 8 hours of software tutorials. I took a shower, called my husband Brian to tell him about my day, then settled in to watch some mindless reality TV. Around 11, I turned everything off and crashed hard. Tomorrow was the last day of training. Then I could drive home and sleep in my own bed again. The parking lot had been pretty full when I closed the curtains. Mostly pickup trucks and older sedans, probably belonging to construction crews and warehouse workers staying long-term. I woke up to voices, angry ones. At first, I thought it was the TV from the room next door. Maybe someone watching an action movie with the volume cranked up. The clock on the nightstand showed 2:47 a.m. in those harsh red numbers. But then the voices got louder, more distinct, and they were coming from outside, not through the walls. Multiple people, men from the sound of it, and they were seriously pissed about something. I could hear car doors slamming, engines revving, that aggressive back and forth that happens when people are about to throw punches. My room was right by the parking lot, remember? So everything was crystal clear through that thin window. I sat up in bed, debating whether to peek through the curtains or just mind my own business. Hotels like this, you learn not to get involved in other people's drama. Then came this sound I'll never forget. Like firecrackers, but deeper, sharper. 3 quick pops, then 2 more. My brain tried to process it as anything else. A car backfiring, someone dropping something heavy. Those industrial dumpster lids slamming shut. But deep in my gut, I knew exactly what I was hearing. Gunshots. Real ones, not movie ones. The yelling turned to screaming. Car tires screeched and then more shots. Rapid fire this time, like someone just holding down the trigger. I rolled out of bed and hit the floor, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The carpet was rough against my cheek, smelling like decades of spilled coffee and cleaning chemicals. I could see the bottom of the door from where I was lying, that thin strip of yellow light from the walkway outside. That's when the first bullet hit my door. The wood splintered with this horrible cracking sound, and I actually saw the hole appear, jagged and dark, about 3 feet up from the floor. Then another one punched through the window, and glass exploded everywhere. The curtains jerked like someone had yanked them, and cold October air rushed in. I pressed myself flatter against the floor, trying to become part of it, trying to disappear into that nasty carpet. More shots outside, so many I lost count, and the sounds were different now. Some hollow pops, some thunderous booms like different guns all going off at once. A bullet hit the wall above the bed and I heard it tear through the drywall, sending white dust drifting down like snow. My phone was on the nightstand, might as well have been on the moon. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but lie there with my arms over my head. The chaos outside was insane, men shouting orders or threats, I couldn't tell which. Someone was crying, these awful gurgling sounds that made my chest tight. Engines roared to life, tires squealed, and I heard metal crunching like cars were ramming into each other. Another bullet came through the window and I actually felt it pass over me, this weird zip of displaced air that made every hair on my body stand up. The mirror on the wall shattered, raining down in pieces. I could hear people in other rooms now, someone screaming. Doors slamming, feet pounding on the walkway above me as people on the second floor ran for the stairs. But I stayed frozen on that floor, counting my heartbeats, trying to make myself smaller, wondering if Brian would even know what happened to me if I died in this crappy hotel room in Indianapolis. Everything went quiet so suddenly it was almost worse than the shooting. My ears were ringing, this high-pitched whine that made everything else sound muffled and distant. I stayed on the floor, barely breathing, waiting for it to start again. Outside, a car alarm was going off. That repetitive honking that usually annoys the hell out of you, but right then it was proof that the world still existed. I could smell gunpowder, sharp and acidic, mixing with the cold air coming through the broken window. My legs were starting to cramp from being tensed so tight, and I realized I was grinding my teeth so hard my jaw ached. Slowly, carefully, I lifted my head just enough to look around. The room was destroyed, holes in the walls, glass everywhere, the curtains hanging in shreds. The TV had a bullet hole right through the screen, and there was stuffing from the mattress floating in the air like cotton balls. Then I heard sirens, distant at first but getting louder fast. Police, ambulances, the whole cavalry from the sound of it. Red and blue lights started flashing through what was left of my window, painting everything in these crazy, shifting colors. I finally found the courage to crawl toward the nightstand, glass crunching under my palms and knees, tiny cuts stinging, but I didn't care. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, even though help was obviously already coming. The operator's voice was so calm, asking if I was injured, telling me to stay low, stay away from windows and doors. I wanted to laugh. My window was gone. My door had holes in it. Where exactly was I supposed to hide? I gave her my room number, told her I was alone, unhurt, but trapped. She stayed on the line, that steady voice keeping me grounded while chaos erupted outside again. Not gunfire this time, but police shouting commands, radios crackling, boots running. For what felt like hours but was probably 20 minutes, I huddled in the corner between the bed and the wall, still on the phone with the 911 operator. She kept asking me questions. Was I bleeding? Could I see anyone outside? Did I hear anyone trying to enter my room? Through the destroyed window I could see cops everywhere, their flashlights sweeping across the parking lot like search beams. There were bodies out there. I could see feet, legs, someone's arm sprawled at an angle that wasn't right. The white rental car next to mine had its windshield spiderwebbed with bullet holes, and there was dark liquid pooling underneath it that I didn't want to think about. An officer finally came to my door, announcing himself loudly before asking if I was okay, if I could open the door. My legs were jelly when I stood up, and I had to lean against the wall to make it to the door. When I opened it, the cop looked like he'd aged 10 years in one night, sweat on his forehead despite the cold, eyes darting everywhere at once. They moved me to the hotel lobby while they processed the scene, gave me one of those metallic emergency blankets that made me look like a baked potato. The lobby was packed with other guests, everyone in pajamas and underwear, some crying, some just staring at nothing. An older woman from room 122 had her arm in a sling. A bullet had grazed her shoulder while she was sleeping. A family with 3 kids huddled together on one couch. The youngest couldn't have been more than 5, clutching a stuffed dinosaur and asking his mom why the fireworks were so loud. The hotel manager, this skinny kid who couldn't have been older than 25, kept apologizing to everyone like he'd personally started the shootout. Paramedics were checking people over, cops were taking statements, and through the glass doors I could see the parking lot transformed into a crime scene. Yellow tape everywhere, numbered markers next to shell casings, photographers documenting everything. A detective interviewed me around 5 a.m., a black woman with gray streaks in her hair who introduced herself as Detective Washington. She was thorough but kind, walking me through every second of what I'd heard and seen. Did I recognize any voices? Had I noticed anything unusual earlier in the evening? Could I identify what types of guns from the sounds? I told her everything I could remember, but it all felt jumbled, like trying to describe a nightmare while you're still half in it. She explained that it had been a drug deal gone wrong, two groups who'd arranged to meet in the parking lot, neither trusting the other, both coming armed. 4 people were dead, 3 more in critical condition at the hospital. The hotel had just been collateral damage, wrong place for all of us staying there. She gave me her card, said I might need to give another statement later, maybe testify if it went to trial. The thought of reliving this in a courtroom made me want to throw up. Corporate put me up in a Marriott downtown for the rest of the night, but I didn't sleep. I sat on that pristine bed in that quiet room and shook for hours. Called Brian at 6 a.m., sobbing so hard he could barely understand me. He wanted to drive down immediately, but I told him I just needed to come home. Skip the last day of training. Funny how unimportant software tutorials seem after you've been shot at. The rental car company didn't even question why I needed a different vehicle. Guess they saw the news. That drive back to Ohio was the longest 3 hours of my life, jumping at every loud noise, pulling off twice because I was crying too hard to see the road. 2 weeks later, a victim's advocate called to check on me, gave me numbers for counselors who specialize in trauma. I went to a few sessions, and it helped some. The company offered to let me skip any future travel, and I took them up on it. These days, when I hear fireworks or a car backfire, my whole body tenses up. But I'm here, I'm alive, and that's more than 4 people from that parking lot can say. The night shift at the Grandview Hotel was supposed to be easy money. That's what my roommate told me when he got me the job. I was 22, fresh out of college with a useless philosophy degree, and desperate for anything that would help me pay rent while I figured out my life. It was a Thursday in early September, maybe around 2018, and I was only 5 days into the job. The hotel sat right off Highway 41, one of those mid-range places that business travelers used when they didn't want to pay downtown prices. During my training, the manager kept saying the night shift was mostly just staying awake and checking in the occasional late arrival. Nobody mentioned that the panic button under the desk hadn't worked in 3 months, or that the security guard position had been cut from the budget 2 weeks before I started. Around 2:47 a.m., this guy walked through the front doors. I remember the exact time because I just checked my phone, counting down the hours until my shift ended at 6. He looked completely ordinary, maybe mid-30s, wearing a wrinkled polo shirt and khakis like he'd been driving all day. Had one of those rolling suitcases, the kind with the broken wheel that makes that annoying clicking sound on tile floors. His driver's license said Robert Lawson, from somewhere in Missouri. He wanted a single room, paid cash for 3 nights up front, which wasn't unusual for that place. While I was counting his money and getting his keycard ready, he kept tapping his fingers on the counter in this weird rhythm, like he was playing an invisible piano. He asked me twice if I was working alone, which seemed odd, but I figured he was just making conversation. Gave him room 147 on the first floor, right down the hall from the lobby. After he left with his keycard, I went back to scrolling through my phone, trying to stay awake with some mindless YouTube videos. The lobby had these huge windows facing the parking lot, and the fluorescent lights inside made it impossible to see anything outside in the darkness. But we had this old monitor behind the desk, showing feeds from 4 security cameras, one in the parking lot, one in the main hallway, one by the side entrance, and one covering the lobby from behind me. About 10 minutes after Lawson checked in, movement on the parking lot camera caught my eye. He was standing by his car, a beat-up silver sedan parked directly in front of the main entrance. The way he was moving seemed strange, like he was checking if anyone was watching. He opened his trunk and pulled out what looked like a large duffel bag, different from the suitcase he'd brought in earlier. Then he unzipped it right there in the parking lot. The camera quality was terrible, all grainy and black and white, but I could see him pulling something out of that bag. At first I thought it might be a baseball bat or maybe a tire iron, but then he held it up to check something, and the parking lot light hit it just right. It was a shotgun, not a hunting rifle or anything you could maybe explain away. A short, mean-looking shotgun. He loaded something into it. I could see the motion even on that crappy camera, then tucked it under a long coat he pulled from the same bag. My whole body went rigid in that chair. He started walking toward the lobby entrance, and I could see him on the monitor getting bigger and bigger. The front doors were maybe 30 feet from my desk. The only other exit was through the back office, but that led to a hallway that connected right back to the main corridor where he could easily cut me off. I reached under the desk for the panic button, pressing it over and over, knowing it was broken but hoping maybe somehow it would work this time. The automatic doors whooshed open, and Lawson walked back in with that same casual stride, except now I knew what was hidden under his coat. He wasn't pointing anything at me yet, just walked up to the counter like he needed extra towels or something. "Hey, buddy," he said, and his voice was different now, lower and steadier. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to open that register and the safe in the back office. We're going to do this nice and quiet, and you're going to go home with a story to tell instead of a hole in your chest." His hand moved slightly under the coat, adjusting the weight of the gun. The weird thing was how calm he seemed, like he'd done this before, like robbing hotels at 3 a.m. was just another Thursday for him. I nodded, trying to speak, but my throat was completely dry. He smiled then, not a crazy smile, but worse. A practical, businesslike smile that said he'd already thought through every possible outcome of this situation. My mind was racing through my training, but they'd spent exactly 0 minutes on what to do during an armed robbery. The cash register had maybe $200 in it, mostly small bills from people buying snacks from the vending machines. The safe in the back had more, probably a few thousand, but I didn't even know the combination. Only the manager and the senior night auditor knew that, and Gregory, the night auditor, wasn't scheduled until tomorrow. I started moving toward the register, trying to buy time, trying to think. "The safe," I managed to croak out. "I don't have the combination. I'm new. They haven't given it to me yet." Lawson's expression didn't change. He leaned against the counter like we were having a casual conversation about the weather. "That's unfortunate," he said. "For you, I mean. Because I drove a long way for what's in that safe and I'm not leaving empty-handed. So you better start thinking real hard about how to open it, or we're going to have a different kind of conversation." I opened the register, my fingers fumbling with the keys, and started pulling out the cash. While I was doing that, I noticed something on the security monitor. A car had just pulled into the parking lot, a taxi. We sometimes got late arrivals from the airport, and sure enough, I saw an elderly couple getting out, the man pulling luggage from the trunk while the woman counted bills to pay the driver. They were heading straight for the lobby. Lawson must have seen my eyes flick to the monitor because he turned slightly to look at the parking lot through the windows. "Well," he said quietly, "this is about to get interesting." He shifted the shotgun under his coat and moved to the side of the counter where he'd be hidden from view when they first walked in. "You're going to check them in like everything's normal," he whispered. "One wrong word, one weird look, and I start with them, understand?" The automatic doors were already sliding open, and I could hear the woman complaining about the airline losing their bags. The couple approached the desk slowly, the man limping slightly with what looked like a bad knee. They were probably in their 70s, wearing matching Florida vacation shirts with palm trees on them. The woman, Dorothy she said her name was, did all the talking while her husband Harold just stood there looking exhausted. She wanted a room on the ground floor because of Harold's knee, and she kept apologizing for arriving so late, explaining their flight had been delayed 4 hours. The whole time she was talking, I could see Lawson in my peripheral vision. standing just 3 feet away behind that half wall that separated the desk area from the lobby. One step and he'd be visible to them. My voice sounded almost normal as I processed their credit card, but I could feel sweat running down my back, soaking through my uniform shirt. Dorothy kept chatting about their grandchildren in Phoenix, completely unaware that we were one wrong move away from disaster. I handed them their key cards, room 108, the opposite direction from where Lawson had checked in earlier. As soon as they disappeared down the hallway, Lawson stepped back into view. "Good job," he said, like I'd passed some kind of test. "Now, about that safe. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to call your manager. Tell him there's an emergency, maybe a water pipe burst in the back office, flooding everywhere. He needs to come down here right now with the safe combination because important documents are getting soaked." He pulled a cell phone from his pocket and set it on the counter. "Use this one, not the hotel phone. Don't want any recordings." I stared at the phone, knowing this would put my manager Russell in danger too. Russell was a decent guy, had 3 kids, always showed me pictures of his daughter's soccer games. "I can't," I said, surprised by my own words. "He won't believe me." "A water pipe? He'll know something's wrong." Lawson's jaw tightened, the first sign of frustration I'd seen from him. He reached under his coat and I heard the distinctive sound of a shotgun being pumped. Not loud, but unmistakable in the quiet lobby. That's when I remembered something from my second day of training. Russell had mentioned the hotel kept a backup cash deposit in a hidden safe behind the breakfast area, separate from the main safe. It was for emergencies, usually about $5,000 in cash. He'd shown me where it was but said only to use it if the main safe malfunctioned, and we needed to make change for a big bill or something. The combination was written on a card taped inside the supply closet, which was stupid but typical for this place. "Wait," I said quickly. "There's another safe. Emergency cash. I know where it is and how to open it." Lawson studied my face, probably trying to figure out if I was lying. "How much?" he asked. $5,000, maybe more if they just made a deposit," I said. It was Thursday, so they might have deposited Wednesday's receipts. He considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Show me. And remember, those old folks are still in the building. Would be a shame if I had to go knock on their door." We walked to the breakfast area, me in front, him staying close enough that I could smell the cigarette smoke on his clothes. The breakfast room was creepy at night. All those empty tables and chairs set up for a meal that wouldn't happen for another 3 hours. The coffee machines were turned off, and the waffle makers sat there like metal mouths waiting to be fed. The supply closet was in the back corner, and my key card worked on it thankfully. Inside, behind boxes of paper cups and napkins, was the combination taped to the wall, just like Russell had shown me. E07-3185, probably someone's birthday. The safe was built into the floor under a piece of loose carpet. As I knelt down to open it, I noticed something else in that closet, a heavy marble rolling pin from when the hotel used to make fresh pastries. It was on the shelf right next to me, covered in dust. Lawson was standing in the doorway, watching the breakfast room entrance, the shotgun now visible under his open coat. This was probably my only chance. My hand was on the safe dial, but I could reach that rolling pin without him noticing if I was careful. The safe clicked open, and there it was, stacks of 20s and 50s, probably about 6,000 total, more than I'd expected. Lawson glanced down at the money, and for just a second his attention was completely on the cash. I grabbed the marble rolling pin and swung it as hard as I could at his knee, the bad one I'd noticed him favoring when he walked. The crack was horrible, like stepping on a thick branch, and he went down screaming. The shotgun clattered across the floor, sliding under one of the breakfast tables. I didn't even think, just ran. Ran straight through the lobby, past my desk, out the automatic doors into the parking lot. I could hear him screaming behind me, cursing and trying to get up. I made it to my car, a rusty Ford Focus, and fumbled with my keys. Started it on the 3rd try and peeled out of that parking lot faster than I'd ever driven. Called 911 from the road, told them everything. They caught him still in the breakfast room, trying to crawl to the shotgun with his destroyed knee. Turns out Robert Lawson wasn't even his real name, and he'd robbed 2 other hotels in neighboring states the same way. The elderly couple slept through the whole thing. I quit the next day, didn't even go back for my last paycheck. Sometimes I still dream about that breakfast room and the sound his knee made when I hit it. It was the middle of July when my sister Melissa and I decided to drive down to visit our grandmother in Alabama. I was 24 at the time, fresh out of nursing school, and Melissa had just turned 21 that spring. We'd been planning this trip for months, setting aside money from our part-time jobs and coordinating our vacation days. The plan was simple: split the 18-hour drive over 2 days, spend a week with Grandma helping her reorganize the house after Grandpa passed, then drive back home to Michigan. We'd done road trips together before, but this was our first time going this far south, just the 2 of us. The excitement of adventure mixed with the responsibility of being there for family made everything feel significant somehow. We'd been driving since dawn that first day, taking turns at the wheel every few hours, singing along to Melissa's meticulously curated road trip playlist. Around 9 that evening, exhaustion hit us both like a brick wall. We started seeing signs for lodging every few miles along Route 65, each promising clean rooms and continental breakfast. The Blue Ridge Motor Lodge caught our attention with its flickering neon vacancy sign, and a price that wouldn't destroy our budget, $49 a night. The place sat about 200 yards from the highway, surrounded by nothing but dense woods and a gravel parking lot that crunched under our tires. The main office was a tiny building separate from the long, single-story row of rooms that stretched into the darkness. An older woman with reading glasses perched on her nose checked us in, handed us a key, attached to a plastic diamond-shaped tag with Room 12 etched into it, and mentioned she'd be leaving at 10 since her replacement called in sick. Room 12 was at the far end of the building, the last door before the parking lot dissolved into complete darkness. The exterior light above our door was burnt out, leaving only the distant glow from the office and a single street lamp near the ice machine to navigate by. Inside, the room smelled like old carpet and that generic cleaning product every cheap motel seems to use, somewhere between pine and bleach. 2 double beds with burgundy comforters took up most of the space, separated by a nightstand with a lamp that made a buzzing sound when you turned it on. Melissa immediately claimed the bed nearest the bathroom while I dropped our bags near the door. We'd packed light, just 2 duffel bags and our purses, planning to do laundry at Grandma's place. The AC unit beneath the window rattled to life when I adjusted the thermostat, drowning out most of the highway noise but adding its own mechanical rhythm to the room. After quick showers and changing into pajamas, me in an oversized University of Michigan shirt and shorts, Melissa in her collection of mismatched tank top and plaid pants, we settled in for the night. It was around 11 when we finally turned off the lights, both of us scrolling through our phones in the darkness, too wired from the drive to fall asleep immediately. The room's curtains were those thick, rubberized blackout kind, but they didn't quite meet in the middle, leaving a 2-inch gap that let in a sliver of parking lot light. I remember lying there, listening to the AC cycle on and off, occasionally hearing a car pass on the distant highway, thinking about what we'd do with Grandma the next day. Melissa's breathing had gotten steady and deep. She could fall asleep anywhere, anytime, a skill I'd always envied. That's when I heard the footsteps outside, heavy and deliberate, stopping right in front of our door. The footsteps just stood there, no knock, no voice, nothing. Through that gap in the curtains, I could make out the shadow of someone's legs. Then came the sound that made every muscle in my body tense up. The door handle slowly turning. Click, click, click. 3 deliberate attempts, testing if we'd locked it. Thank God we had. I reached over and grabbed Melissa's arm, whispering her name, but she just mumbled something incoherent and rolled over. The handle stopped moving, but the shadow didn't leave. Whoever it was just stood there, perfectly still, for what must have been 2 or 3 minutes but felt like hours. Part of me wanted to call out, ask who was there, but something deep in my gut told me to stay quiet. Maybe they had the wrong room. Maybe they were drunk. The shadow finally moved away, footsteps heading toward the parking lot. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in minutes and reached for my phone to check the time. 11:17 p.m. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. People get confused at motels all the time, especially late at night. All those identical doors, barely visible room numbers. But I couldn't relax. Every little sound made me jump. The ice machine dropping cubes, a door slamming somewhere down the row, the AC kicking back on. 20 minutes passed, then 30. I was just starting to drift off when the footsteps returned. This time they weren't slow or hesitant. They were confident, purposeful. The handle turned again, more aggressively this time, rattling against the lock. Then came the knocking. Not polite, tentative knocks, but heavy, insistent pounding that shook the thin door in its frame. "Housekeeping," a man's voice called out, rough and slurred. At nearly midnight? No way. Melissa shot up in bed, instantly alert, her eyes wide in the darkness. We looked at each other, both of us knowing this wasn't right. "We don't need anything," I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. The pounding stopped. Then, in a completely different tone, lower and clearer, "Just open the door, I know you're awake." Melissa grabbed her phone and immediately dialed 911 while I scrambled to push the dresser against the door. The operator answered just as the man outside started kicking the door, each impact making the cheap wood flex inward. "We're at the Blue Ridge Motor Lodge on Route 65, Room 12. Someone's trying to break in," Melissa practically screamed into the phone. The operator said units were on the way, but the nearest patrol was at least 15 minutes out. 15 minutes. The kicking stopped suddenly, replaced by something worse. The sound of metal scraping against metal near the lock. He was trying to jimmy it open. I ran to the window, yanking back the curtains to see if we could escape that way, but it was one of those safety windows that only opened about 4 inches at the top. Through the glass, I could see him now. A large man in a dark jacket, maybe 6'2", with a baseball cap pulled low. He had something in his hand, working it into the door frame near the lock mechanism. The parking lot was completely empty except for our car and an old pickup truck I hadn't noticed before, parked crooked across 2 spaces. The scraping stopped, and for a moment, everything was quiet. Then he spoke again, his mouth close to the door. "Your car has Michigan plates. Long way from home. No one knows you're here, do they?" That's when real panic set in. He'd been watching us, planning this. Melissa was crying now, still on with 911, and I was trying to think of anything we could use as weapons. The lamp was bolted to the nightstand. The hangers were those useless rounded ones. Then I remembered the bottle of mace in my purse. Dad had insisted I carry it. I grabbed it just as we heard a crack. He'd gotten something through the door frame. The lock was starting to give. Without thinking, I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Fire! Fire! Help! There's a fire!" Something I'd read once about how people respond more to fire than to calls for help. Melissa joined in, both of us screaming. A door opened somewhere down the row, then another. "What's going on?" someone yelled. The man at our door cursed, something guttural and angry, and the pressure on the door suddenly stopped. We could hear him running. Heavy boots on concrete, heading toward the parking lot. I rushed to the window again and watched him sprint to the pickup truck. But instead of leaving immediately, he sat there in the driver's seat, engine running, lights off, just watching our room. Other guests had come outside now. An elderly couple from room 8, a woman with 2 kids from room 10, all looking confused and alarmed. The woman was on her phone, probably calling 911 too. But the man in the truck wasn't leaving. He was waiting. Melissa was explaining to the operator that he was still in the parking lot, and they told us to stay in the room, keep the door barricaded. Then, maybe 3 minutes later, he did something that still makes me sick to think about. He got out of the truck, walked calmly to the elderly couple, and started talking to them, gesturing toward our room. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but he was pointing at our door, shaking his head, looking concerned, playing the victim somehow. The old man seemed to be buying it, nodding along. That's when I cracked the window and yelled, "He tried to break into our room. Don't believe him. We called the police." The man's head snapped toward our window, and even from 40 feet away, I could see his expression change, from fake concern to pure rage. He said something quick to the elderly couple and started walking back toward our room, not running this time, but striding with this terrifying determination. The elderly woman pulled her husband back inside their room. The mother grabbed her kids and disappeared too. It was just him, us, and the empty parking lot again. He came right up to our window this time, close enough that I could see he had pale eyes, maybe gray or light blue, and a scar that ran through his left eyebrow. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice calm but with this underlying threat that made my skin prickle. "I was just trying to help. Your friend texted me, said you needed help." "What friend?" We hadn't told anyone where we were staying. Before I could respond, he pulled out a phone and held it up to the window, showing a text conversation I couldn't quite read in the darkness. "See? She sent me your room number. Told me to come check on you." Neither of us had texted anyone. Melissa, still on with 911, was shaking her head frantically. This man was completely delusional, or an incredibly practiced liar. That's when we heard the sirens in the distance. The man's whole demeanor shifted instantly. He backed away from the window, that fake concerned expression completely gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. "Wrong room," he said flatly, like he was talking to himself more than us. Must have been the wrong room. He walked back to his truck with this unnatural calmness, taking his time like he had nothing to hide. But just before getting in, he turned back and looked directly at me through the window. He didn't say anything, just stared for maybe 5 seconds, like he was memorizing my face. Then he got in the truck and drove away. No rush, no squealing tires. Just pulled out of the parking lot and headed north on the frontage road, away from the approaching sirens. I kept watching until his taillights disappeared into the darkness, terrified he might circle back. The police arrived about 2 minutes after he left, 2 patrol cars with lights flashing, filling the parking lot with red and blue. Melissa finally stopped shaking enough to unlock the door and let them in. The officers took our statements, examined the door frame where he'd damaged it trying to break in, and put out a description of the truck and the man. They found scratches and tool marks on the lock mechanism, confirming someone had definitely tried to force entry. One officer, a younger guy named Officer Daniels, told us this was the 3rd report they'd had in 2 months about attempted break-ins at motels along this stretch of highway, always targeting women traveling alone or in pairs. They never caught the guy. The motel owner, who showed up about an hour later in pajamas and a windbreaker, moved us to a room right next to the office and had his son stay in the office all night to keep watch. We didn't sleep. We sat on one bed together, backs against the headboard, taking turns staying alert while the other dozed off for minutes at a time. At first light, around 5:30 a.m., we packed up, got in our car, and drove the remaining 8 hours to Grandma's house without stopping except for gas. We never found out who that man was or what he really wanted, though I can guess. I still think about those pale eyes sometimes, that calculated way he tried different tactics to get to us. We took a different route home, flying instead of driving, and I haven't stayed in a roadside motel since. I'm a traveling nurse, and last month I was driving through Nevada on my way to a new assignment in Colorado. It was getting late, around 11 p.m., and I'd already been on the road for 9 hours straight. My eyes were burning from staring at the endless stretch of highway, and I knew I needed to stop for the night. I pulled off at an exit that had a cluster of motels and gas stations. Nothing fancy, just the typical roadside setup you see in the middle of nowhere. I picked the Desert View Motel because it had the most cars in the parking lot. figuring that meant it was at least decent enough for other travelers. The place looked tired but clean, with faded turquoise paint peeling off the walls and a flickering neon sign that buzzed like angry wasps. I was exhausted, planning to grab maybe 6 hours of sleep before hitting the road again at dawn. The woman at the front desk had bleached blonde hair with dark roots showing and chewed gum while she processed my credit card. She handed me a key attached to a plastic diamond-shaped tag with the number 217 on it, told me ice machines were at the end of each floor, and went back to watching something on her phone. Room 217 was on the second floor, 3 doors from the stairwell. The hallway carpet had this nauseating pattern of burgundy swirls that probably hadn't been replaced since the 80s. I remembered dragging my suitcase past room 215, hearing a TV blaring through the thin walls, some game show with lots of applause and bells ringing. When I got into my room, it smelled like old cigarettes masked by cheap air freshener, that artificial cherry scent that makes your throat itch. I dropped my bag, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed on the bed without even pulling back the covers, just needing to close my eyes for a minute before I'd get up to shower. Maybe 20 minutes later, I woke up to voices coming through the wall from room 219. At first, it was just muffled conversation, a man and woman talking, nothing unusual. I figured they were just another couple passing through, maybe arguing about directions or where to eat tomorrow. But then the man's voice got louder, sharper, and I could make out some of the words. Ugly things, calling her stupid, worthless, saying she'd ruined everything again. The woman's voice was quieter, pleading, trying to calm him down. I've worked in enough emergency rooms to recognize that tone, that careful way people talk when they're trying not to set someone off. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake, listening as his voice kept escalating. Then I heard the first crash, like something heavy hitting the wall, and the woman let out this strangled cry that made every hair on my arms stand up. The next few minutes were pure chaos on the other side of that wall. More crashes, the sound of glass breaking, furniture being thrown around. The woman was crying now, begging him to stop, and I could hear the terror in her voice. I grabbed my phone and called 911, but the dispatcher said they were 40 minutes out. Apparently, there were only 2 patrol cars covering this entire stretch of highway. 40 minutes. I couldn't just sit there for 40 minutes listening to this, so I called the front desk, thinking maybe they had some kind of security, or at least they could intervene somehow. The same gum-chewing woman answered, sounding annoyed that I'd interrupted her show. I told her what was happening, that someone was getting hurt in room 219, that she needed to do something right now. She sighed like I was asking her to move mountains, said she'd send someone up to check on it. About 2 minutes later, I heard heavy footsteps in the hallway and a knock on their door. A man's voice, probably maintenance or security, asked if everything was all right in there. The fighting stopped immediately. There was this eerie silence for maybe 10 seconds. Then the abuser answered, his voice completely different now, calm, friendly even, saying they were just watching TV and sorry if it was too loud. The maintenance guy must have bought it because I heard him walking away. As soon as those footsteps faded, the abuser started yelling again. But this time, it wasn't at the woman. He was ranting about how someone had called to complain, how some nosy bitch had tried to get him in trouble. My whole body went rigid when I realized he was talking about me. Then he said something that made my chest tighten. It had to be the room next door. I'm gonna find out which one. Everything happened fast after that. I heard their door slam open so hard it bounced off the wall. Heavy footsteps in the hallway, going first to room 221 on the other side. He pounded on that door, but no one answered. They must have been empty. Then those footsteps came back, stopped right outside my door. The pounding started so hard I thought the door might actually crack. "I know you're in there," he yelled, his voice raw with rage. "You think you can call the cops on me? You think you can stick your nose where it doesn't belong?" His fists kept hammering the door, and he started kicking it too. The cheap motel door was shaking in its frame, and I could see the deadbolt straining against the wood. I backed away, grabbed my car keys and phone, trying to think straight while this maniac was trying to break down my door. The woman from 219 was in the hallway now too. I could hear her crying, begging him to come back to the room, telling him he was making things worse. I called 911 again, practically screaming at the dispatcher that he was trying to break into my room, that I needed help now. She said units were en route, still 25 minutes out, and asked if I could get to a safe location. Safe location? I was on the second floor with only one stairwell nearby, and he was right outside my door. The window in my room had one of those safety stops that only let it open about 4 inches. No way I could squeeze through. The bathroom had no window at all, just a ventilation fan that rattled when you turned on the light. I could hear the wood around the deadbolt starting to splinter. He must have been over 6 feet tall and built like a linebacker because the whole door frame was bending with each impact. The woman outside was screaming now, telling him the cops were coming, pulling on his arm, trying to get him away from my door. I heard him shove her hard. She hit the opposite wall with a thud and went quiet for a moment. That's when I made a decision that probably saved my life. I grabbed the desk chair, one of those heavy wooden ones, and wedged it under the door handle as an extra barrier. Then I called the front desk again. The woman answered on the first ring this time. She must have heard the commotion even from downstairs. I told her I was going to make a run for my car, that she needed to be ready to lock the lobby doors behind me if he followed. She started to protest, but I hung up and got ready. I put my car key between my fingers like I'd learned in a self-defense class years ago, tucked my phone in my pocket, and stood by the door listening. He was still pounding, but I could hear him getting winded, his breathing heavy and ragged. The woman was back on her feet, pulling on him again, and for just a moment he stepped back from my door to push her away again. That was my chance. I yanked the chair away, turned the deadbolt, and threw the door open. He was about 3 feet away, his back to me as he grabbed the woman by her shoulders. She had a swollen eye already turning purple, blood running from her nose onto a Garfield nightshirt that was ripped at the collar. The second he heard my door, he spun around and I got my first clear look at him. Maybe 35, unshaven, wearing jeans and a wife beater stained with what looked like beer. His eyes were bloodshot and wild, pupils dilated huge. The hallway reeked of alcohol and sweat. For half a second, we just stared at each other. Then I bolted toward the stairwell. I could hear him right behind me, his work boots thundering on that ugly carpet. I hit the stairs, taking them 3 at a time, using the railing to swing myself around the landing. My ankle twisted on the last step, but I kept going, adrenaline blocking out the pain. The parking lot was darker than I remembered, only a few yellow streetlights creating pools of dim light between long shadows. My car was parked in the middle section, a blue Nissan Altima that had never looked so beautiful. I could hear him burst through the stairwell door behind me, cursing and screaming threats about what he'd do when he caught me. The asphalt was still warm from the day's heat, and I remember the smell of oil and hot rubber as I sprinted between the cars. Other guests must have heard the commotion because I saw curtains moving in several windows, faces peering out, but nobody came to help. I made it to my car, fumbled with the key fob, and heard that blessed beep as the doors unlocked. I threw myself inside, slammed the locks just as he reached the car. He started pounding on the driver's side window with both fists, his face inches from the glass, spit flying as he screamed at me. The window was vibrating so hard I thought it might shatter. My fingers were trembling so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. He moved to the front of the car, slamming his palms on the hood, then picked up a rock from the landscaping and raised it over his head. That's when I got the engine started, threw it in reverse, and floored it. He had to jump back to avoid getting hit, and the rock went flying somewhere in the dark. I spun the wheel hard, tires screeching on the asphalt, and gunned it toward the exit. In my rearview mirror, I could see him running after me for a few seconds before giving up, standing in the middle of the parking lot with his arms raised, still yelling. The woman had come outside too, standing by the stairwell door, hunched over and holding her ribs. I wanted to stop for her, to take her with me, but I knew if I stopped he'd catch up. I had to leave her there, and that still eats at me. I drove straight to a well-lit gas station about 2 miles down the highway and parked right in front of the doors where the cameras could see everything. Called 911 again, told them where I was, what had happened. While I waited, I called the motel and asked about the woman. The desk clerk said she'd gone back to the room with him, that they'd refused to open the door when the maintenance guy went back up. The police finally showed up about 15 minutes later, took my statement, said they'd send units to the motel. I found out later they arrested him for domestic battery and criminal threats, but the woman wouldn't press charges. She left with him the next morning. I think about her sometimes, wonder if she ever got away, if she's even still alive. I never stayed at a roadside motel again after that night. I'll drive exhausted for hours just to reach a proper hotel in a populated area. The sound of someone pounding on a door, any door, still makes me nauseous. I know I did the right thing by calling for help, but I learned that sometimes doing the right thing puts a target on your back. I was 34 when it happened, just another February night in 2017. I'd been selling medical equipment for about 6 years by then, covering most of the Midwest territory. The job meant spending at least 15 nights a month in different hotels, everything from decent chains to those sketchy motels where the ice machine never works, and the carpet has stains you don't want to think about. That particular Monday, I'd checked into a mid-range place just outside Minneapolis, one of those generic 3-story buildings with exterior corridors and doors that face the parking lot. Room 237, second floor, right next to the stairwell. I remember being exhausted after driving 7 hours from my previous appointment in Des Moines, barely managing to grab a burger from the drive-thru before collapsing into bed around 11. The digital clock on the nightstand read 2:47 a.m. when I heard it, the distinctive click of a keycard reader accepting a card. You know that mechanical sound, the one that's followed by the green light and the heavy clunk of the lock disengaging. Except I hadn't ordered room service, hadn't called for anything, and housekeeping sure as hell doesn't come around at that hour. My brain tried to rationalize it at first, that foggy, half-awake state where you're not sure what's real. Maybe someone had the wrong room. Maybe it was the maintenance guy checking something. But then I heard the door handle turn. That slow, deliberate movement like someone was trying to be quiet. The door pushed open inch by inch, and the hallway light created this thin vertical line that gradually widened across the carpet. I stayed completely still, every muscle in my body tensing up like a coiled spring. Through barely open eyelids, I watched a figure step into my room. A man, probably 6 feet tall, wearing what looked like a maintenance uniform, though something about it seemed wrong even in the dim light. He had this peculiar way of moving, taking these measured steps like he was counting them, and his head kept tilting at odd angles, as if he was listening for something. The door clicked shut behind him, and suddenly the room was dark again, except for the faint glow from the alarm clock and the thin strip of light under the bathroom door I'd left on. He just stood there for what must have been 30 seconds, but felt like hours, and I could hear his breathing. Not heavy or labored, but deliberate, controlled, like someone practicing meditation. The strangest part was how methodical he was. He didn't rush to grab my wallet on the dresser or go for my laptop bag propped against the wall. Instead, he moved to the corner near the window and just waited. I could make out his silhouette against the curtains, standing perfectly still like he was part of the furniture. My phone was on the nightstand, maybe 18 inches from my right hand, but reaching for it would mean moving, and moving would mean he'd know I was awake. The rational part of my brain kept screaming at me to do something, to yell, to jump up, to grab the lamp and defend myself. But there was something about the way he carried himself, this eerie calmness that made me think he might have a knife or worse tucked into that uniform. Then he started doing something I'll never forget. He pulled out what looked like a small notebook and a pen light, the kind doctors use to check your pupils. The beam was narrow, focused, and he began scanning the room with it systematically. First the walls, then the floor, occasionally pausing to write something down. The light passed over my face twice, and both times I fought every instinct to flinch or close my eyes tighter. He spent extra time examining the area around my suitcase, even crouching down to inspect the zipper pulls without actually touching anything. When he aimed the light at the mirror above the dresser, I caught a glimpse of his face in the reflection. Mid-40s maybe, clean-shaven, with these deep-set eyes that seemed completely focused on whatever he was documenting. He had this small scar running through his left eyebrow, the kind you'd get from a bar fight or a childhood accident. After about 10 minutes of this bizarre inspection, he moved closer to the bed. I could smell him now, not body odor or cologne, but this weird chemical smell, like industrial cleaner mixed with something metallic. He stood at the foot of the bed, and I heard the notebook pages rustling as he wrote more notes. My left foot was maybe 6 inches from the edge of the mattress, and I became hyper-aware of it, terrified that any involuntary twitch would give me away. He started mumbling to himself, too quiet for me to make out the words, but the tone was conversational, like he was explaining something to someone who wasn't there. Then he did something that made my heart pound so hard I was sure he'd hear it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out what looked like a hotel keycard, but it had all these wires attached to it, connected to some kind of small electronic device. He walked back to the door and inserted the modified keycard into the reader. Instead of the usual beep, there was this series of rapid clicks, and then he opened the door slightly and wedged something under it. Looked like a rubber doorstop. The hallway was empty from what I could see, just the ugly geometric pattern carpet and the ice machine humming in the distance. He left the door cracked open about 2 inches and returned to his spot by the window, but this time he was facing the bed directly. I kept my breathing shallow, counting each inhale and exhale to keep them regular, fighting the urge to gulp air as panic crept up my throat. The worst part was not knowing what he was waiting for. Was someone else coming? Was he going to stand there all night? The uncertainty was eating at me, making every second stretch into eternity. That's when I heard footsteps in the hallway, multiple sets, moving quickly but quietly. Through the crack in the door, I saw shadows passing by, and then someone whispered something sharp and urgent. The man in my room responded with 3 distinct knocks on the wall, 2 quick, 1 slow, like some kind of signal. Suddenly, he moved with purpose, sliding something under my mattress near the headboard. I felt the mattress shift slightly from whatever he'd placed there, something flat and rigid. He then grabbed his notebook, shoved it in his pocket, and headed for the door. But before leaving, he turned back and stared directly at me for what must have been 5 full seconds. Even in the darkness, I could tell he was looking right at my face, and I used every ounce of willpower to keep my eyes steady, my breathing regular, playing dead better than I'd ever done as a kid. The door clicked shut and I heard multiple footsteps moving away down the corridor, then down the stairs. I stayed frozen for another 5 minutes, maybe 10. I couldn't tell any more. My whole body was trembling now, adrenaline making my muscles twitch and jump. When I finally worked up the courage to move, I grabbed my phone and immediately called 911. While waiting for the police, I turned on every light in the room and checked under the mattress. What I found made no sense at all. A manila envelope sealed with a single word written on it: payment. Inside was exactly $3,000 in $100 bills and a business card with no name. Just a phone number with an area code I didn't recognize. The bills looked real, felt real, even had consecutive serial numbers. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Was this some kind of drop? Had they used my room as a dead drop for something illegal? The police arrived within 15 minutes. 2 officers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else at 4 in the morning. They took my statement, examined the room, bagged the money and card as evidence. One of them, Officer Hoffman, a guy about my age with tired eyes, told me they'd been having issues with identity theft rings using hotels for their operations. Apparently, these groups would break into rooms, plant evidence or contraband, then retrieve it later to avoid direct handoffs. But when they ran the keycard logs, things got weird. According to the hotel's system, no one had accessed my room after I checked in. The manager, this nervous woman named Angela who kept apologizing, swore their system was foolproof, that every entry was logged. She even showed us the computer records. According to their data, my door never opened between 11 p.m. when I entered and 4:15 a.m. when the police arrived. They moved me to another room for the rest of the night, but I didn't sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about that modified keycard device, how it apparently bypassed the hotel's system completely. Around 6 a.m., Officer Hoffman called me with an update that made everything even stranger. The phone number on the card? It belonged to a medical equipment company in Illinois, the same company I was supposed to visit for a sales pitch that afternoon. When they contacted the company, the owner, a man named Douglas Crawford, claimed he'd never heard of me and had no appointments scheduled with any sales reps. But here's the thing. I had emails from him, dating back 3 weeks, setting up this exact meeting. When I showed the police the emails, they found that the domain was spoofed. The whole correspondence was fake. Someone had been planning this for weeks, maybe months, orchestrating an elaborate scheme to get me to that specific hotel on that specific night. The police kept the money as evidence and told me they'd investigate further, but I could tell from their expressions they were as baffled as I was. I canceled all my appointments for the week and drove straight home to Wisconsin, checking my mirrors constantly, paranoid that someone was following me. Over the next few days, I discovered more inconsistencies. Charges on my company credit card for hotels I'd never stayed at, signed receipts with my signature for restaurants in cities I'd never visited, all from the past month. My company launched an internal investigation, but nothing ever came of it. The charges were reversed, the police case went cold, and officially, according to the hotel's records, no one ever entered my room that night. 6 months later, I quit that job and found work that didn't require travel. I still don't know what I was really caught up in that night, whether I was a random target or specifically chosen, whether that man knew I was awake the whole time. All I know is that sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, I still hear that sound, the slow, deliberate turn of a door handle in the darkness. I worked the night shift at the Sunset Lodge for 6 years before everything changed. It was March of 2022, and I was 34, living in a small town in Montana where nothing exciting ever happened. The lodge sat right off Interstate 90, one of those budget places that truckers and families on road trips would use for a quick overnight stay. My job was simple enough: check people in, handle complaints about the ice machine, occasionally deal with drunk guests trying to sneak into the pool after hours. I lived in a studio apartment 5 minutes away, had a routine that never changed, and honestly thought I'd probably work there until I retired. The pay wasn't great, but the job was easy, and my manager, Frank, was decent enough to work for. Most nights I'd bring a book or watch Netflix on my phone during the dead hours between 2 and 5 a.m. when nobody ever showed up. Everything started with a news alert on my phone during a particularly slow shift in early April. A woman had been found dead at the Riverside Inn, about 40 miles east of us along the same interstate. The article didn't have many details, just that housekeeping had discovered her body when she didn't check out on time. I remember thinking it was sad, maybe a heart attack or something, and went back to my crossword puzzle. But then Frank called an emergency staff meeting the next afternoon, which was weird because he never called meetings. He looked different that day. His usually relaxed face was tight with worry, and he kept running his hand through his thinning hair while he talked. Apparently, the woman at the Riverside hadn't died of natural causes. She'd been murdered, and the police were telling all the hotels along I-90 to be extra vigilant about security. 2 weeks later, it happened again. The Pine Valley Motel, 60 miles west of us this time. Another woman, found in her room with no signs of forced entry, no struggle, nothing stolen. The news said both rooms had been cleaned so thoroughly that investigators couldn't find a single fingerprint that didn't belong to hotel staff. That detail stuck with me because I'd seen how people leave hotel rooms. They're usually disasters. Towels everywhere, trash overflowing, sheets twisted up like tornadoes hit them. But these rooms were spotless, like someone had spent hours scrubbing every surface with bleach. The victims were both traveling alone, both had checked in late at night, and both had paid in cash. The police started calling it a pattern, and suddenly every hotel worker along I-90 was on edge, watching every guest like they might be either the next victim or the killer. My shift on that Friday in late April started like any other. I got to work at 11 p.m., relieved Judith, who worked the evening shift, and settled in for what I expected would be another boring night of fighting to stay awake. The lodge had maybe 15 guests total. I could see it on our computer system. Room 106 had the Sinclair family with their 3 kids. 118 had an elderly couple who'd checked in around dinner time, and there were a handful of truckers scattered throughout the first floor. Around 1 a.m., a man walked through our front door, and I'll never forget the way he moved. It wasn't anything obviously wrong, but there was this calculated precision to his steps, like he was measuring each movement before he made it. He wore a plain gray jacket, dark jeans, and carried a simple black duffel bag that looked brand new, not a single scuff mark on it. He approached the desk with this peculiar smile, not friendly, not unfriendly, just perfectly neutral, like someone had taught him the exact angle his mouth should make to appear approachable. His eyes were pale blue, almost gray in the fluorescent lighting, and they never quite focused on my face when he talked. Instead, he seemed to be looking at a spot just past my left ear. "I need a room for the night," he said, and his voice had this flat quality to it, each word pronounced too carefully, like English wasn't his first language even though he had no accent. When I asked for his ID and credit card, he pulled out a wallet that was also brand new, the leather still stiff, no worn edges, no receipts or photos tucked inside. His driver's license said James Whitmore from Pennsylvania, but the picture barely looked like him. Not different enough that I could refuse it, but just enough that it made me pause. I gave him room 214, second floor at the far end of the hallway. As I handed him the key card, our fingers briefly touched, and his skin was oddly cold and completely dry, like shaking hands with someone wearing latex gloves. He thanked me with that same measured voice and headed for the elevator, his footsteps eerily silent on our worn carpet. I watched him on our security monitor as he went up to the second floor, and here's where things got strange. Instead of going straight to his room, he stood in the hallway for almost 5 minutes, just standing there, not checking his phone, not looking around, just standing perfectly still facing the wall. Then, as if someone had flipped a switch, he suddenly moved again, walked to his door, and disappeared inside. The whole thing made me uncomfortable enough that I decided to do something I'd never done before in 6 years. I started watching the security cameras more closely. Around 2:30 a.m., a woman checked in. She was maybe 40, traveling alone, looked exhausted from a long drive. She wore a wrinkled business suit and kept yawning while I processed her registration. Her name was Diana Morrison, heading to Seattle for a conference, and she asked specifically for a quiet room away from the elevator. I had rooms available on the first floor, but something made me hesitate about putting her on the second floor near that man. Call it intuition or paranoia from all the recent news, but I gave her room 108 downstairs. She paid in cash, mentioned her credit cards were maxed out from business expenses, and headed to her room pulling a small red suitcase behind her. I went back to monitoring the cameras, switching between different views every few minutes. The man in 214 hadn't left his room, no lights showing under his door, nothing unusual, but I kept watching anyway. At exactly 3:15 a.m., I saw him emerge from his room on the monitor. He was wearing different clothes now, a black jacket and baseball cap that obscured his face from the cameras. But it was definitely him. I recognized that strange, measured walk. he didn't take the elevator this time. Instead, he used the stairs at the far end of the hallway, the ones that led down to the side exit near the parking lot. I switched camera views and watched him walk across the lot, but he didn't go to any car. He just walked to the edge where our property met the woods, stood there for maybe 30 seconds, then turned around and came back inside through the same door. This time, though, he didn't go back to his room. He went to the vending machine area on the first floor and stood there, not buying anything, just standing in that same unnaturally still way. From that position, I realized he had a clear view down the hallway where Diana Morrison's room was located. My mouth went dry as I watched him stand there for 20 minutes straight, never moving, never shifting his weight, just watching that hallway like a statue. I picked up the phone to call Frank, then put it down. What would I say? That a guest was acting weird by the vending machines? That wasn't illegal. I couldn't call the cops because someone gave me bad vibes. But then I remembered something from Frank's emergency meeting. The police had said both previous victims had called the front desk in the middle of the night to report someone trying their door handle. Both times, when security checked, nobody was there. I pulled up our door access log on the computer, something I'd only learned how to do during training but never actually used. Room 214 showed multiple exit and entry records, but what caught my eye was something else. The system showed key card attempts at 3 different rooms on the first floor. All declined, because his card only worked for 214. He'd been trying to get into other rooms. I immediately called the police. While the phone rang, I kept my eyes glued to the monitors, watching the man still standing by the vending machines. The dispatcher answered, and I tried to keep my voice steady as I explained the situation. The recent murders, the strange guest, the attempted entries into other rooms. She said she'd send a patrol car to check things out, maybe 15 minutes. I hung up and looked back at the screen, but he was gone. My heart started pounding as I frantically switched between camera views. Nothing in the hallways, nothing in the parking lot, nothing in the stairwells. Then I heard it, the soft ding of the elevator arriving at the lobby, the elevator I could see on my screen, which showed it was empty. But I heard those doors open and close right there in the lobby with me. The sound came from maybe 20 feet away, but there was nobody there. I stood up from my chair, grabbing the baseball bat Frank kept under the desk, and that's when all the lights in the lobby went out. The emergency lighting kicked in after 2 seconds, casting everything in a dim red glow. My computer was still running on battery backup, the screens providing the only real light. I could hear footsteps now, slow and deliberate, coming from the direction of the first floor hallway. Not from the elevator, but from the corridor that led to Diana Morrison's room. I gripped the bat tighter and moved toward the hallway, every instinct screaming at me to run, but knowing I couldn't leave Diana or the other guests in danger. As I reached the corner, I saw him at the far end of the hallway, trying Diana's door handle. She must have heard it because I heard her voice from inside, asking who was there. He didn't answer, just kept slowly turning the handle, testing it. I shouted at him to step away from the door, and he turned to look at me. In the red emergency lighting, his face looked completely blank, no expression at all, like a mannequin. He started walking toward me with that same measured pace, and I raised the bat, yelling that the police were on their way. He stopped about 10 feet from me and tilted his head slightly, like a dog hearing a strange sound. Then he spoke, and his voice was different now, no longer flat but almost melodic, rehearsed. You should have minded your own business. Check in, check out, that's all you needed to do. He reached into his jacket and I swung the bat without thinking, pure adrenaline taking over. I missed him completely, but it made him step back. We stood there for what felt like hours but was probably seconds. And then I heard the beautiful sound of sirens approaching. His head snapped toward the front entrance, and without another word, he turned and ran. Not that measured walk anymore, but a full sprint toward the side exit. I ran after him, still carrying the bat, and saw him disappear into the woods just as the police cars screeched into our parking lot. They found him 3 hours later, hiding in a drainage pipe about a mile away, still carrying his black duffel bag filled with cleaning supplies, zip ties, and a collection of hotel key cards from different chains. Turns out his real name was Vincent Garrett, and he'd been a night janitor at a hotel chain for 15 years before they laid him off. The police said he'd developed an obsession with hotel cleanliness and had some twisted idea about purifying hotels of solo female travelers he deemed unworthy of the rooms. He'd been using stolen master key cards and employee access codes he'd collected over the years, which explained how he got into those other hotels without forcing entry. The FBI linked him to 5 murders across 3 states, all along major interstate routes. Diana Morrison was safe, though she was pretty shaken up when she learned how close she'd come to being victim number 6. I quit the Sunset Lodge 2 months later, not because I was scared, but because I couldn't walk those hallways without seeing him standing there in that unnatural way. Frank understood, gave me a good reference, and I work at a bookstore downtown now. Sometimes I'd drive past the lodge and see new people working the night shift through the window, and I wonder if they know what almost happened there. I never told the full story to anyone except the police, and now you folks here. I still have nightmares sometimes about that empty elevator dinging in the lobby, but at least I know he's serving multiple life sentences without parole. They never did figure out how he made the lights go out that night, but honestly, I don't want to know. I had been staying at a mid-range hotel during a work trip, the kind of place with beige carpets that always smelled faintly like lemon cleaner no matter the hour. At the time, I was juggling long shifts and trying to prepare a presentation, so most evenings I'd return exhausted, just grateful that the bed was made and fresh towels were waiting. The housekeeper on my floor was a woman named Marlene. She wasn't chatty, but she had this habit of humming softly while pushing her cart, a tune I never recognized but always seemed to repeat itself day after day. It became part of the background of my stay, almost comforting in a strange way. The last evening before things went bad, I came back later than usual, close to midnight. The hallway lights buzzed like they hadn't been replaced in years, and the air felt heavy, like the AC wasn't circulating properly. Marlene's cart was parked outside one of the corner rooms, but she wasn't there. I thought it was odd since housekeeping usually wrapped up hours earlier, but I figured maybe someone requested extra service. Her cart looked messy, bottles of cleaner tipped over, rags half hanging out of the bag. I didn't see her, so I kept walking, but the image stuck with me longer than I expected. The next morning, the lobby had this uneasy energy. Guests whispered at the check-in desk, and staff moved faster than usual, heads down, avoiding eye contact. When I asked the front desk about late checkout, the clerk gave me a distracted nod, like she hadn't actually heard what I said. Then I caught something unusual. 2 men in suits, not guests, heading toward the service hallway with a manager trailing behind. Their shoes clicked loudly on the tile, and the sound carried until a door shut behind them. That was when the rumor started circling. Marlene hadn't shown up for her shift, and nobody knew where she was. Later that afternoon, police cars pulled up out front. Their presence was impossible to ignore, flashing lights painting the lobby walls in red and blue. Word spread fast. Blood had been found in the back hallway, near the service area where the carts were kept. Someone said it wasn't a small spill either, but a streak that smeared along the wall, as if something had been dragged. People gathered near the elevators, speculating in low voices. But when I asked one of the staff if Marlene was okay, she looked at me for a long moment and just said, "Go back to your room." That answer didn't sit right with me at all. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept picturing her abandoned cart, the bottles rattling when I walked by. Around 3 a.m., I went down to grab a soda from the vending machine near the stairwell. On my way back, I noticed a section of the service hallway taped off with yellow police tape. No one was guarding it, but the silence there was suffocating. Like even the hum of the ice machine cut out when I got close. I didn't linger. I practically jogged back to my room. By the next morning, the police presence had doubled. Guests waiting for rides stood by the entrance, clutching their luggage like they couldn't get away fast enough. That's when I overheard two officers near the front desk asking about a guest who had checked out at dawn. Apparently, he'd left in such a hurry that he skipped breakfast, rushed past the night clerk, and barely signed his name on the slip. The oddest part was his rental car, still sitting in the lot, keys on the driver's seat, door unlocked. Nobody could explain why he'd leave it like that. Later in the day, while waiting for my ride to the airport, I passed near the maintenance door and glimpsed one of the detectives speaking with the manager. The detective held a clipboard and kept pointing toward the hallway where the blood was found. The manager looked pale, nodding quickly but saying nothing. I wanted to ask, but before I could, the detective's eyes flicked toward me, and I immediately looked away, pretending to fuss with my phone. Something about his stare made it clear guests weren't supposed to know more than we already did. When I finally checked out, the woman at the desk barely spoke. She slid the receipt toward me without looking up, her nails drumming the counter. Behind her, I noticed Marlene's name tag sitting alone in a tray, the plastic cracked like it had been tossed carelessly. That detail stuck with me more than anything else, like a quiet admission that she wasn't coming back. As my cab pulled away, I glanced at the rental car still in the lot, baking under the sun, the windshield catching the light. The sight left me with more questions than answers, and I knew I'd never look at hotel hallways the same way again. A week after I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I tried searching the local news, but all I found were vague headlines. Investigation ongoing at downtown hotel, and authorities tight-lipped after incident. No mention of Marlene by name, just a staff member. It bothered me. She wasn't just a staff member. She was a real person with a voice I could still hear in my head, humming that same repetitive tune. The anonymity made the whole thing feel even darker, like she had been erased. Months later, curiosity got the better of me. I called the hotel pretending I was looking to book again, hoping maybe they'd slip some detail. The woman on the phone hesitated when I asked if Marlene still worked there. She said quietly, "We don't have anyone by that name," and then rushed to transfer me to reservations. It was the way she said it, clipped and final, like a door slamming shut. I didn't push further. I knew I wouldn't get answers that way. The part that still gnaws at me is the rental car. I read online that it stayed in the lot for weeks before the company finally towed it. People speculated the man who checked out left on foot or got picked up by someone. Nobody could understand why he'd abandoned the car like that. It feels connected, too connected to ignore. The timing, the blood, Marlene disappearing the same night he left, it all lines up too neatly. I still travel for work, but I'll never forget that hotel. Every time I walk past a housekeeping cart now, I catch myself scanning for the person behind it, listening for that soft humming that became so familiar. I've learned that sometimes the scariest things don't happen in abandoned buildings or dark forests. They happen in bright hallways where you least expect it. I'll never know what really happened to Marlene, but one thing I'm certain of, something terrible unfolded behind those service doors, and it wasn't just an accident. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I drive trucks for a living. Been doing it for about 15 years now, and nothing really prepares you for what I'm about to share. It was a Tuesday night in October 2018, and I was hauling a full load of consumer electronics from a warehouse in Phoenix heading east toward Albuquerque. The manifest showed mostly tablets, smartphones, gaming consoles, the kind of stuff that gets stolen and flipped quick on the black market. I just passed through Flagstaff around 11 p.m., and the temperature gauge showed 38 degrees outside. My wife, Melissa, had called me earlier that evening to remind me about our daughter's soccer game that weekend, and I remember thinking how I couldn't wait to get home after this run. The CB radio was quiet, just occasional static, and I had an old country playlist going to keep me awake. That stretch of I-40 through Arizona gets pretty desolate after midnight. Nothing but darkness and the occasional coyote crossing. About an hour past Flagstaff, maybe around midnight, I noticed these two cars up ahead acting strange. One was a dark blue sedan, looked like a Nissan Altima with those aftermarket LED strips under the chassis that made it glow purple. The other was a silver SUV, probably a Chevy Tahoe, with heavily tinted windows and no front license plate. They were weaving between lanes, speeding up then slowing down, almost like they were racing or messing around. At first I figured it was just some kids being stupid, maybe drunk, so I eased off the accelerator and gave them plenty of space. The last thing you want when you're hauling 60,000 pounds of cargo is to get tangled up with reckless drivers. But then they started doing this weird synchronized thing where they'd match speeds perfectly, driving side by side across both lanes for about 30 seconds before one would surge ahead. My dashboard showed we were doing about 55 in a 75 zone, and something about their movements felt deliberate, practiced even. The whole situation changed in about 10 seconds. The Tahoe suddenly gunned it and pulled ahead maybe 200 yards while the Altima stayed right in front of me, maintaining that slow crawl. Then I saw the Tahoe's brake lights flare up like Christmas decorations as it jerked hard to the left, sliding sideways across both lanes. The tires screamed against the asphalt, leaving these thick black marks I could see in my headlights. My first thought was that the driver had lost control, maybe blown a tire or something, because the SUV ended up completely perpendicular to the road, blocking everything. I hit my air brakes hard, and the whole rig shuddered as 70,000 pounds of truck and cargo fought against momentum. The sound was like a giant metal beast groaning, and I could smell the brake pads burning immediately. Thank God I'd left enough distance, because I managed to stop about 40 feet from the Tahoe. The Altima had slowed even more, and was now creeping along in the right lane beside me, boxing me in against the median. My instincts kicked in before my brain fully processed what was happening. 23 years of marriage to a cop's daughter means you hear stories, and Melissa's dad, Frank, had told me about these highway cargo theft rings operating out of Mexico and California. I reached for my CB radio with one hand while my other went to the gear shift, ready to ram through if needed. But before I could even key the mic, both cars' doors flew open simultaneously, and 4 men jumped out wearing black ski masks and dark coveralls. 2 came from the Tahoe with crowbars, heading straight for my trailer's lock mechanism. The other 2 from the Altima ran toward my cab, and one was carrying what looked like a small sledgehammer. The guy with the hammer had this weird limp, like his left leg was shorter than his right, but he moved fast despite it. They weren't saying anything, just moving with this eerie efficiency like they'd done this 100 times before. I locked my doors just as the first guy reached my driver's side door. He started pounding on the window with his fist, not the hammer yet, just testing. Through the glass, I could see his eyes through the mask holes, bloodshot and wide, maybe high on something. The window was rattling in its frame with each hit, and I knew it wouldn't hold long against that hammer. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but there was no signal out there, just that mocking no service message. The CB radio was my only shot, so I started broadcasting on Channel 19, the emergency channel all truckers monitor. Breaker, breaker. This is eastbound I-40 mile marker 178. Attempted hijacking in progress. Need immediate assistance. 4 armed suspects. Static came back, then nothing. The guys at my trailer were making progress. I could hear the metallic grinding of crowbars working against the lock through my side mirrors. One of them had produced a portable angle grinder from somewhere, and orange sparks were flying off my trailer doors like a 4th of July sparkler show. The limping guy finally brought the sledgehammer up and swung it at my window. The safety glass spider-webbed instantly but held together, these white cracks spreading out like lightning bolts from the impact point. He reared back for another swing, and that's when I made my decision. I dropped the truck into gear and hit the accelerator, turning the wheel hard right toward the shoulder. The rig lurched forward with a diesel roar that drowned out everything else. The two guys at my cab dove away. The limping one actually rolled pretty athletically for someone with that gait issue. My plan was to get around the Tahoe using the shoulder, even if it meant taking out some guardrail. But as soon as I started moving, I heard gunshots. 3 quick pops that sounded like firecrackers but definitely weren't. My passenger mirror exploded into pieces, and I could hear another round punch through the sleeper cabin behind me. These weren't just thieves. They were willing to kill for this load. I floored it, and the big Peterbilt 579 responded like an angry bull. The speedometer climbed past 40, 50, approaching 60 as I aimed for the narrow gap between the Tahoe and the concrete median barrier. At the last second, the masked men scattered like roaches when you turn on a kitchen light. The one who'd been shooting, a tall, skinny guy from the Tahoe, actually dropped his pistol and had to scramble back for it. My truck's front bumper clipped the Tahoe's rear end with this horrible shrieking of metal on metal, spinning it about 90 degrees and shoving it into the median. The impact jolted me hard against my seatbelt, and my coffee thermos went flying, spilling lukewarm coffee all over the dash. But I was through back on open highway, and I kept my foot planted on that accelerator. In my remaining mirror, I could see them running back to their vehicles, the limping guy moving with surprising speed despite his handicap. The Altima's engine roared to life first, its purple underglow creating this surreal streak of color against the dark asphalt as it gave chase. For about 3 miles, it was just me and that Altima in the strangest race of my life. They stayed about 50 yards behind me, matching my speed at around 75, which was pushing it hard for a loaded rig on that stretch. Every time the road curved, I could feel the trailer wanting to swing wide, the cargo shifting inside with these deep metallic groans. Then I saw it, a sight that nearly made me weep with relief. Red and blue lights appeared in my mirror, coming up fast from behind the Altima. Not just 1 patrol car, but 3, plus what looked like an unmarked detective vehicle. The Altima immediately hit its brakes and tried to take an emergency vehicle turnaround, but the cops were ready for that move. 2 units followed while the others continued toward me. Later, I found out that another trucker about 10 miles behind me had heard my CB call and had enough signal to phone it in. Doug Brennan was his name, hauling produce from California, and I still send him a Christmas card every year for saving my life that night. The cops had me pull over at the next mile marker, and I sat there shaking while they checked on me. The officer who approached my cab was a young woman, couldn't have been more than 25, with this thick Boston accent that seemed completely out of place in Arizona. Officer Kathleen Murphy, badge number 4417. Funny how you remember certain details when you're in shock. She had me step out of the cab slowly, and that's when I saw the damage. Beyond the missing mirror and the bullet holes, there were pry marks all along my trailer where they'd been working on the lock. The angle grinder had cut about halfway through the thick steel before I'd driven off. Officer Murphy said they'd been tracking this crew for 6 months, hitting truckers carrying electronics between Phoenix and Albuquerque. They specifically targeted solo drivers on Tuesday and Wednesday nights when traffic was lightest. The limping guy, she told me, was actually the ringleader, a former dock worker who'd injured his leg in a forklift accident and knew exactly which shipments were worth hitting. They caught 3 of the 4 that night. The Altima passengers gave up pretty quick once the spike strips shredded their tires, but the limping guy somehow vanished into the desert. The cops found the Tahoe abandoned about 2 miles from where everything went down, still had my truck's paint on its bumper and everything. The 3 they arrested were all from the same crew out of Bakersfield, with records for armed robbery and interstate cargo theft. During the investigation, they found a whole notebook in the Altima with detailed information about trucking routes, shipping schedules, even driver names and habits. My run was marked with a red star and the note, "Electronics shipment, single driver, no team. Vulnerable at mile 175-180. Turned out they had someone at the Phoenix warehouse feeding them information. A night shift supervisor named Glenn Howard, who'd been selling shipment details for $500 a pop. The FBI got involved because of the interstate nature of it all, and I had to testify at the trial 8 months later. The company gave me 2 weeks paid leave after that night, but honestly, getting back in the truck was harder than I expected. For the first month back, every time I saw 2 cars driving together at night, my chest would tighten up and I'd start sweating through my shirt. Melissa wanted me to quit, find something local, maybe work dispatch or become a driving instructor. But trucking is what I know, and I wasn't going to let those bastards take that from me. I did make some changes though. Started carrying a legal tire thumper that doubles as a pretty solid defensive tool, installed better locks on my trailer, and now I always check in with dispatch every hour when doing night runs. The company also started sending high-value electronics shipments with team drivers only, and they vary the routes randomly. That warehouse supervisor, Glenn Howard, got 7 years federal time for his part in it. The 3 they caught that night got 15 to 20 for armed robbery and conspiracy. The limping guy, though, he's still out there somewhere, and that keeps me sharp every single run. It's been 5 years now since that night on I-40, and I still drive that same stretch regularly. Every time I pass mile marker 178, I can see those black skid marks from the Tahoe, though they're fading more each year from sun and weather. Sometimes other truckers will get on the CB around that area and ask if I'm the guy from the blockade incident. Word travels in our community. I always tell them the same thing. Trust your gut, maintain your distance, and never assume you're alone out there even when it looks empty. The investigation revealed that crew had successfully hit 11 trucks before they tried for mine, stealing over $3 million in merchandise. Those drivers all said the same thing. It happened so fast they barely had time to react. The only reason I managed to get away was because I'd been paranoid about their synchronized driving for that extra mile before they made their move. That 30 seconds of suspicion probably saved my life, definitely saved the cargo, and helped take down a major theft ring. Though I heard from Officer Murphy last year that similar crews are popping up again, using the same tactics but with motorcycles instead of cars. So yeah, I still drive nights, still haul valuable loads, but now I watch everything and everyone like my life depends on it, because it actually might. I've been driving 18-wheelers for almost 7 years now, and the isolation never really bothered me until that night in late November 2022. Most people think trucking is a man's world, and they're not wrong. Being a 34-year-old woman hauling freight across the country definitely puts me in the minority. I was on a routine run from Denver to Kansas City, carrying a load of furniture that needed to be delivered by morning. The weather had been decent, just cold and dry, and I'd been making good time on I-70. Around 2 in the morning, my body started demanding a break. I'd already pushed past my usual stopping point because I wanted to stay on schedule, but my eyes were getting heavy and my lower back was screaming from sitting in the same position for hours. There was this little rest stop about 40 miles east of Colby that I'd used before. Nothing fancy, just a small parking area with restrooms, a couple of vending machines, and one of those old coffee machines that probably hadn't been cleaned since the Reagan administration. The place was nearly empty when I pulled in, which wasn't unusual for that time of night. There was an old Peterbilt parked at the far end with its lights off, probably another driver catching some sleep, and a beat-up sedan near the restroom building. I parked my Freightliner closer to the building than I normally would because the overhead light near the entrance was flickering, creating these weird shadows that made the whole place feel like a scene from a bad horror movie. I grabbed my jacket, my phone, and made sure my pocket knife was clipped to my jeans. Standard procedure when you're a woman alone at night. The cold hit me hard when I stepped out of the cab, That sharp plains wind that cuts right through you no matter how many layers you're wearing. I did a quick walk around my truck first, checking the tires and making sure my load was still secure, then headed toward the building. The restroom was exactly as glamorous as you'd expect. Cracked tiles, a mirror so scratched you could barely see your reflection, and that overwhelming smell of industrial disinfectant trying to mask something worse. But it was functional, and that's all that mattered. After washing up, I headed over to the vending area where that ancient coffee machine sat humming against the wall. The thing looked like it belonged in a museum, one of those old models with the paper cups that drop down and fill while you watch through a grimy plastic window. I fed it a couple of quarters and waited while it made all sorts of concerning noises before finally producing something that vaguely resembled coffee. It tasted like burnt rubber mixed with battery acid, but it was hot and had caffeine, which was all I needed to make it through the last stretch of my route. I stood there for a minute, sipping that awful coffee and stretching my legs, looking out through the glass doors at my rig sitting under that flickering light. The sedan I'd noticed earlier was still there, but now I could see someone sitting in the driver's seat, just a dark silhouette barely visible through the windshield. Something about the way they were positioned bothered me. Too still, too focused on the building entrance. But truckers see all kinds of weird stuff at rest stops, and I'd learned not to be paranoid about every little thing. I tossed the half-empty cup in the trash and pushed through the doors, already calculating how many hours I had left to drive and whether I'd need to stop again before Kansas City. The cold air felt good after the stuffy restroom building, and I took a deep breath, ready to get back on the road. That's when I heard it. The sound of an engine starting up, not the sedan, but something bigger. A white van I hadn't noticed before was parked on the other side of the building, hidden in the shadows where the overhead lights didn't reach. It pulled out slowly at first, like the driver was just leaving, but then the headlights swung toward me and the engine revved hard. The van accelerated across the parking lot, tires squealing on the cold asphalt, and came to a violent stop right between me and my truck, maybe 15 feet away from where I was standing. The side door was already sliding open before the vehicle had completely stopped moving, and two men jumped out, one tall and lanky wearing a faded denim jacket, the other shorter but built like a linebacker in a black hoodie. They moved with purpose, like they'd done this before, spreading out to cut off any escape route I might try to take. The tall one was already reaching for me, his face partially hidden under a baseball cap, but I could see his mouth moving, saying something I couldn't hear over the blood pounding in my ears. Every self-defense class I'd ever taken, every warning my mother had given me about traveling alone, every horror story I'd heard from other female truckers, it all crystallized in that moment. I didn't scream, didn't waste time trying to reason with them. Instead, I pivoted hard to my left, using the momentum to slam my elbow into the tall one's ribs as he lunged forward. He grunted and stumbled, giving me just enough space to move. The shorter one was faster than he looked, though, and his thick fingers caught my jacket sleeve, yanking me backward with enough force to nearly pull me off my feet. I could smell cigarettes and something sour on him, like old beer and sweat. Without thinking, I drove my boot heel down hard on his instep while simultaneously twisting my body and ripping my arm free, leaving my jacket in his grip. The few seconds of confusion gave me a tiny window, and I took it. I sprinted toward my truck, my boots slipping on patches of frost on the asphalt. Behind me, I could hear them cursing and their footsteps pounding after me. The tall one had recovered and was gaining ground, those long legs of his eating up the distance between us. My truck seemed impossibly far away, that flickering overhead light making everything look distorted and unreal. I reached for my keys while running, thanking God I always kept them clipped to my belt loop instead of in my pocket. The key fob was in my hand, and I was hitting the unlock button repeatedly, hearing that beautiful chirp of my locks disengaging. Just as I reached the driver's side, fingers grabbed at my shirt from behind, getting a handful of fabric. I spun around, using the motion to swing my fist wildly, catching somebody. I think it was the tall one, somewhere in the face. I heard him swear, and felt his grip loosen just enough for me to wrench free and grab the door handle. I hauled myself up into the cab with strength I didn't know I had, my muscles running on pure adrenaline. The shorter one had circled around and was trying to climb up on the passenger side, his meaty fists pounding on the window while the tall one grabbed at my leg as I pulled it inside. I kicked out hard, my boot connecting with something solid, his shoulder or chest maybe, and yanked the door shut so hard the whole cab shook. The automatic locks engaged with a solid thunk that was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. They were both at my door now, the tall one's face pressed against the window, his breath fogging up the glass while he shouted things that made my stomach turn. The shorter one was pulling on the door handle over and over, like somehow it might magically open if he just kept trying. Their van was still running behind them, exhaust visible in the cold air, the side door still hanging open like a mouth waiting to swallow someone whole. I fumbled for my phone with trembling fingers, managing to dial 911 while simultaneously starting my truck's engine. The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional, asking me my location, and I had to force myself to speak clearly, even though every instinct was screaming at me to just drive, to get away from these men who were still circling my truck like wolves. The tall one had produced something from his pocket. It looked like a slim gem or some kind of tool, and was working it around my door frame while his partner kept watch. I told the dispatcher what was happening, reading off the mile marker I'd memorized from the rest stop entrance, describing the men and their van while trying to keep my voice steady. She told me units were already on their way, that a state trooper was less than 10 minutes out, but 10 minutes felt like a lifetime when someone was actively trying to break into your truck. I threw the transmission into gear, ready to run them over if I had to, when I noticed something that made everything even worse. The sedan I'd seen earlier, the one with the person watching the building, it had pulled up behind my trailer, blocking me in. The driver was out now, and in the flickering light I could see it was a woman, thin and nervous looking, keeping watch while the two men continued their assault on my cab. This wasn't random. This was coordinated. These people were a team, and I'd walked right into their trap. The dispatcher was still on the line, and I could hear her relaying information to the responding units, her voice a lifeline keeping me grounded while chaos erupted around me. The tall one's tool scraped against metal as he worked it deeper into the door frame, and I knew it was only a matter of time before he figured out the right angle to pop the lock. The truck's engine was running, rumbling beneath me like a caged animal, and I made a decision. I laid on the air horn, holding it down with my full weight, the deafening blast echoing across the empty plains. The sound was so loud it made my ears ring, but I didn't let up. The men stepped back, startled, covering their ears, and that's when I saw my chance. I released the brakes and started rolling forward slowly, even though the sedan was behind me. The woman saw what I was doing and scrambled back toward her car, probably realizing that my 18-wheeler would crush that little sedan like a tin can if I decided to reverse. The shorter man pounded on my hood with both fists, his face twisted in rage, while the tall one ran back toward their van, maybe going for a weapon or maybe deciding this wasn't worth it anymore. I kept the horn going in short, rhythmic blasts, 3 long, 3 short, 3 long, SOS in Morse code, hoping maybe that other trucker in the Peterbilt would hear it and understand. The dispatcher was asking me questions, but I could barely hear her over the horn and my own heartbeat. Then I saw them, red and blue lights in the distance coming fast down the interstate. The moment those lights became visible, everything changed. The woman was already back in her sedan, tires spinning as she peeled out of the parking lot. The two men ran for their van, the tall one slipping on the icy asphalt and nearly falling before catching himself on the vehicle's side mirror. They didn't even bother closing the sliding door before the van lurched forward, making a hard turn toward the exit. I gave the dispatcher the license plate number as they fled. It was from Nebraska. Probably stolen, but at least it was something. The state trooper's cruiser came screaming into the rest stop less than 30 seconds after they'd gone, followed quickly by another unit. My whole body was shaking so bad I could barely hold my phone, the adrenaline crash hitting me like a wall. The trooper, a middle-aged black woman named Officer Washington, had to talk to me through the window for a full minute before I felt safe enough to unlock the door and step out. She was patient and professional, checking me over for injuries while her partner secured the scene and called for additional units to search for the van. My shirt was torn where the tall one had grabbed me, and I had scratches on my arms I didn't even remember getting. Officer Washington had me sit in her cruiser, where it was warm while I gave my statement, going through every detail I could remember. The denim jacket, the black hoodie, the woman's nervous movements, that Nebraska plate. She took photos of the scratches on my truck's doorframe where they'd tried to break in, and bagged my torn jacket that the shorter one had pulled off me during the struggle. What she told me next made me realize just how lucky I'd been. They'd been tracking this group for weeks, at least 4 attempted abductions along I-70 and I-80, all targeting women traveling alone at remote rest stops during late-night hours. 2 women were still missing. The method was always the same. The woman would arrive first in the sedan, acting as a spotter, identifying potential victims and making sure there weren't too many witnesses around. Once she gave the signal, the van would move in for the grab. They'd gotten sloppy with me though, maybe because I was in a truck and they thought I'd be an easy mark once I was out in the open, or maybe because they were getting desperate. Officer Washington said my fight, and the noise I made probably saved my life. Most victims had been grabbed before they could react, pulled into that van and gone before anyone knew what had happened. She kept me there for another 2 hours, going through mugshots on her laptop, coordinating with other departments, making sure I was okay to drive. By the time she finally cleared me to leave, the sun was starting to come up, painting the Kansas plains in shades of orange and pink. I made my delivery 6 hours late, my hands still trembling slightly as I signed the paperwork. The client complained about the delay until they saw the police report number I handed them along with their invoice. They caught them 3 days later at a rest stop near North Platte, trying the same thing with another woman who'd thankfully seen the news report about my encounter and immediately locked herself in her car and called 911. The woman with the sedan turned out to be the girlfriend of the tall one, Nancy Garrett, a former nursing student who'd lost her license for stealing drugs. The shorter man was her cousin, Walter Briggs, with a record going back 15 years for assault, robbery, and kidnapping. The tall one, her boyfriend James Lawson, was the worst of them, connected to human trafficking rings operating across 3 states. I had to testify at their trial 8 months later, sitting in that courtroom and looking at them again, this time in orange jumpsuits and shackles. Nancy got 12 years, Walter got 20, and James got life without parole. They found one of the missing women because of evidence in that van, alive but barely, locked in a basement in Iowa. The other woman was never found. I still drive trucks, still make that Denver to Kansas City run sometimes, but I've never stopped at that rest area again. I installed extra locks on my cab doors and started carrying pepper spray alongside my knife. Some nights when I'm driving alone and see a white van in my mirrors, my chest gets tight, and I have to remind myself to breathe. But I won't let them take this job from me. This is my life, my freedom, and I'll be damned if I let 3 pieces of garbage make me afraid of the open road. "15 years behind the wheel of big rigs teaches you a lot about reading people and situations, especially when you're alone on dark highways. That September night in 2017, my old Kenworth was loaded with electronics heading for Newark, grinding along Route 80 through Pennsylvania. The divorce papers were fresh in my glove compartment, signed just that week, and honestly, the endless stretch of asphalt was the only therapy I needed. Just me, 60,000 pounds of cargo, and the steady rumble of the diesel keeping me company through the darkness. Night driving had always been my preference anyway. Fewer idiots on the road, better delivery times, and something almost meditative about watching mile markers disappear while the rest of the world slept. Must have stopped at that Clarion truck stop 50 times over the years, Always the same routine: fuel up, grab coffee, check the load, keep moving. The fuel needle was kissing empty when I finally pulled off the highway around 2 a.m., and my kidneys were screaming after 6 hours straight in the driver's seat. The lot was dead quiet for a Thursday night. Maybe 5 or 6 trucks scattered around, all dark except for the soft glow of sleeper cab lights here and there. The overhead fluorescents at the diesel pumps kept flickering and buzzing, making everything look like it was underwater, shadows jumping around in ways that made no sense. That's when I noticed him. This figure standing about 20 feet from the pumps, just barely inside the edge of the light, holding what looked like a piece of cardboard. He wasn't pacing or waving at trucks like hitchhikers usually do. Wasn't even moving at all, really. Just standing there like a statue, wearing this thick canvas work jacket that must have been suffocating in the humid September air. His sign just said, "East" in black marker. Nothing else, no destination, no plea for help, just that one word. My first instinct was to ignore him completely, just fuel up and get back on the road. But something about how still he was standing there got under my skin in a weird way. While the diesel pump clicked away, filling my tanks, I kept glancing at him through my side mirror. The guy never shifted his weight, never looked at other trucks pulling in, just kept staring straight ahead at nothing in particular. His face was hard to make out in the bad lighting, but I could tell he was maybe mid-40s, clean-shaven, with this peculiar scar that ran from his left eyebrow down to his cheekbone, pale and thick like a worm. When the pump finally clicked off, I was putting the nozzle back when he started walking toward me. Not rushed, but purposeful, like he'd been waiting specifically for me to finish. His boots made no sound on the concrete, which seemed impossible given how heavy they looked. "Need a ride east," he said when he got close enough, and his voice had this flat quality to it, like someone reading lines they'd memorized but didn't understand. Up close, I could see his eyes were this washed-out gray color, barely any pupil visible, and he had this habit of not blinking that made maintaining eye contact uncomfortable as hell. The jacket he wore had old stains on it, dark patches that could have been oil or something else, and it smelled like copper pennies mixed with diesel exhaust. I told him I was only going as far as Brookville, maybe 40 miles up the road, figuring that would discourage him since most hitchhikers want longer hauls. But he just nodded once, said, "That works," and started walking toward the passenger side of my cab without waiting for me to actually agree to anything. Something in my gut twisted up tight, every instinct telling me to just drive away, leave him standing there. But I'd given rides before, plenty of times, and what kind of person would I be leaving someone stranded at 2 a.m.? He climbed up into the cab with surprising agility for someone wearing such heavy boots, settling into the passenger seat like he belonged there. The interior light stayed on for those few seconds while the door was open, and I got a better look at his hands. They were completely hairless, even on the knuckles, with fingernails filed down to nothing and skin that looked almost waxy under the dome light. He didn't have any bag or belongings with him, which struck me as odd for someone hitchhiking long distance. As I pulled out of the truck stop and merged back onto the highway, he sat there perfectly straight, not leaning back against the seat, hands placed flat on his thighs like he was posing for a photograph. The CB radio crackled with static, and I noticed the temperature gauge starting to act funny, dropping and rising even though the engine temp was steady. About 5 miles down the road, he finally spoke again, asking what I was hauling, and when I told him electronics, he made this sound that wasn't quite a laugh, more like someone clearing their throat. "Electronics," he repeated, tasting the word like it was foreign to him. "Expensive cargo, probably insured for what, 100,000, maybe more?" The questions made my neck tense up because that's not something you ask a driver you just met. That's information thieves want to know. Then he asked if I had a regular route, if I always drove alone, if anyone was tracking my progress tonight. Each question came out in that same flat tone, no emotion behind it, like he was checking boxes on some mental list. The way he never looked at me while talking, just stared straight ahead at the dark highway, made the whole conversation feel like an interrogation. I kept my answers vague, Lied about having to check in with dispatch every hour. Mentioned my cousin was meeting me in Brookville to take over the driving. He nodded at each lie like he knew exactly what I was doing, and then asked if I had any weapons in the truck. Said it just like that, casual as asking about the weather. My mouth went dry as sand, and I gripped the steering wheel hard enough to make my knuckles ache. Told him I had a tire iron under the seat. Nothing more, even though my .38 was sitting in the sleeper compartment right behind us. He made that throat-clearing sound again and shifted slightly in his seat, the first real movement he'd made since getting in. That's when I noticed his reflection in the passenger window wasn't matching his movements quite right, like there was a half-second delay between what he did and what the glass showed. "Tire iron," he said slowly, like he was filing that information away. "Useful tool. Can open a skull like a coconut if you hit it right." The casual way he said it, like discussing a recipe or sports score, made my chest tighten up. We passed a sign saying Brookville was 25 miles ahead, and I started calculating if I could make it that far. Started thinking about pulling into the next well-lit area and making up some excuse about engine trouble. Then he reached into his jacket pocket slow and deliberate, and I tensed up ready to grab for my pistol if needed. But he pulled out this old flip phone, the kind nobody uses anymore, and started pressing buttons without actually calling anyone. The screen wasn't even lit up, but he held it to his ear and started talking to nobody, giving someone directions to our exact location, describing my truck down to the license plate number I hadn't told him. Blue Kenworth, Pennsylvania plates, driver's about 6 foot, heavy set, wearing a Steelers cap, he said into the dead phone. And I wasn't wearing a Steelers cap, had never owned one. But when I glanced at my reflection in the rearview mirror, there it was, sitting on my head like it had always been there. My actual John Deere cap was nowhere to be seen. He continued his fake conversation, mentioned the mile marker we'd just passed, said 15 minutes, and closed the phone with a snap that sounded like breaking bones. The next 10 miles felt like 100, every shadow on the side of the road looking like another person waiting. Every set of headlights in my mirrors seeming to follow too close for too long. He'd gone back to sitting statue still, but now he was humming something tuneless under his breath. Just 3 notes repeated over and over, and the sound was drilling into my brain like a dentist's tool. I kept checking the clock on the dashboard, watching those 15 minutes count down, wondering what would happen when they hit 0. At 12 minutes, I saw an exit coming up with a gas station sign, one of those bright Shell stations that's always busy, and I made a split-second decision to pull off, started flipping my turn signal. "No," he said, not loud but firm, and his hand moved to rest on the gear shifter between us, not grabbing it but just placing his palm on top like a warning. "Brookville. You said Brookville." His fingers were ice cold even through my thermal glove when they brushed against my hand, cold like they'd been soaking in freezer water. I pushed his hand away and yanked the wheel toward the exit anyway, but the truck wouldn't respond right, like the steering column had locked up. The exit ramp flew past while I fought with the wheel, the truck staying perfectly in its lane like it was on rails. "Mechanical problems," he said in that flat voice. Not a question, but a statement. "Happens sometimes with these older models. Steering just gives out." But I knew my truck, knew every sound and shake it made, and this wasn't mechanical failure. The wheel was turning fine. The truck just wasn't listening to it. The speedometer showed we were doing exactly 55, but looking out the window, the trees were flying by like we were doing 90. My GPS started recalculating constantly, the little voice saying, "rerouting," over and over until I switched it off. Then I saw them in the mirror, 2 sets of headlights that had been pacing us for the last 5 miles, keeping perfect distance, never falling back or getting closer. He must have noticed me looking because he said, "Friends of yours?" and made that not quite laugh sound again. That's when I decided to hell with it all and reached back for my pistol, figuring whatever happened next couldn't be worse than what they had planned. But my hand hit empty air. The sleeper compartment wasn't there anymore, just a solid wall of metal like it had never existed. The entire back section of my cab had somehow vanished, turned into smooth steel. He watched me realize this with those unblinking gray eyes and said, "Funny how memory plays tricks. You sure you ever had a sleeper back there?" The Brookville exit sign appeared in my headlights, and without me touching anything, the truck started slowing down, the turn signal clicking on by itself. The two cars behind us moved into formation, one sliding into the left lane, one staying right, boxing us in as we headed down the exit ramp. My cell phone in the cup holder went dead, screen black, wouldn't turn back on no matter how many times I pressed the power button. The exit ramp seemed to go on forever, curving into darkness where no lights were visible, even though I knew there should be a flying J right at the bottom. "Here's what happens now," he said, his voice different suddenly, more animated, more real than it had been the entire ride. "You're going to pull into that warehouse up ahead, the one with the broken windows and the red door. You're going to back your trailer up to loading dock 3. Some people are going to unload your cargo, take about 20 minutes. Then you're going to drive away and forget this ever happened. You won't call the police, won't file an insurance claim, won't even remember what I look like by morning." The warehouse materialized out of the darkness exactly as he described it, abandoned looking but with fresh tire tracks in the gravel lot. The two cars pulled in behind us, their lights going dark simultaneously. I thought about ramming the building, jackknifing the trailer, anything to stop this, but my arms wouldn't obey, just kept steering exactly where he wanted. As we pulled up to the loading dock, I saw more figures emerging from the shadows, all wearing the same heavy canvas jackets, all moving with that same unnatural stillness between motions. The unloading took exactly 20 minutes, like he said, those figures working in perfect coordination. No talking, no wasted movements, just box after box disappearing into the warehouse. I sat there unable to move, unable to even turn my head, just watching in the mirrors as my entire load vanished. The whole time he sat next to me humming those same 3 notes, occasionally checking that dead flip phone like it was showing him something I couldn't see. When they finished, one of the figures slapped the back of my trailer twice and suddenly I could move again, my arms and legs tingling like they'd been asleep. "Drive," he said simply, and I did, backing out of the dock and heading toward the exit. But something in me snapped then, maybe desperation or just pure anger at being made helpless in my own truck. I grabbed the tire iron from under my seat, the one thing that was still where it should be, and swung it at him hard as I could while driving. The iron went right through him like he was made of smoke, clanging against the passenger door, and he turned to look at me with something that might have been disappointment. "Should have just kept driving," he said. And then he was gone, just vanished like he'd never been there at all. The Steelers cap was gone too, my John Deere one back on my head, the sleeper compartment behind me like normal, my .38 right where I'd left it. Even the smell of copper and diesel was gone, replaced by the usual scent of coffee and air freshener. I pulled over at the real Flying J at the bottom of the real Brookville exit, the one that had always been there, and called the police with shaking fingers. They found my cargo 3 states away a week later, most of it already sold off, but the warehouse I described didn't exist, never had according to county records. The security footage from the Clarion truck stop showed me pulling in for fuel, but there was nobody at the pumps, no hitchhiker, just me standing there for 3 minutes talking to empty air before getting in my truck and driving away alone. They think I was in on it, of course, that I staged the whole thing for insurance money, but the charges didn't stick because they couldn't figure out how I did it. I don't drive trucks anymore. I work at a hardware store in Ohio now, and I never pick up hitchhikers, never stop at that Clarion exit, and I definitely never drive at night. Sometimes I still hear those 3 notes he was humming, usually when I'm about to fall asleep, and I wonder if he was ever really there, or if something else entirely happened that night, something my mind won't let me remember correctly. The night everything went sideways, I was hauling 40,000 pounds of packaged foods from Nevada down to Houston in my beat-up Kenworth. 8 years of driving trucks had taught me plenty about reading dangerous situations. And at 34, I was one of maybe a dozen female long-haul drivers who regularly worked that brutal desert corridor. It was August 2015, and the heat was absolutely punishing even after dark, making the asphalt shimmer like water under my headlights. My rig was this faded blue beast that I'd bought at auction and rebuilt myself. The paint job so weathered, it turned purple under fluorescent lights. I'd been wrestling the wheel for 14 hours straight, my shoulders screaming and my eyes burning from the glare of oncoming traffic, when I finally decided to stop at this enormous truck stop just outside Amarillo. The place was massive, one of those complexes with 50-some fuel pumps, a full-service diner that claimed to have the best chicken fried steak in Texas, hot showers that actually had decent water pressure, and a convenience store that never closed its doors. I always remembered this particular stop because the main neon sign had been broken for years, displaying Fuel Center instead of Fuel Center, which never failed to make me smile despite my exhaustion. When I pulled in around 12:30 that morning, the lot was packed with way more trucks than usual for that time of night. At least 30 big rigs were scattered across the cracked asphalt, engines idling in a constant low hum that mixed with the buzz of insects drawn to the overhead lights. I maneuvered into a spot on the eastern edge of the lot, strategic enough to keep the building in sight, but far enough from other trucks to give me room to pull out fast if necessary. A habit every female driver develops after enough close calls at rest stops. After pumping diesel and grabbing what had to be the most disgusting cup of coffee ever brewed, imagine burnt motor oil mixed with chalk, I climbed back into my cab to deal with the electronic logging system and maintenance reports the company demanded every single night. The dome light in my cab created this isolated yellow glow against the darkness outside, and I had my driver's side window cracked about 2 inches to let some air circulate, because even at night the temperature was still hovering around 90 degrees. I was typing notes into my tablet about a slow leak in the rear passenger side tire, and documenting that strange grinding noise the transmission had started making near El Paso, when I heard footsteps crunching through the gravel right beside my door. The knocking came soft at first, almost polite, 3 gentle taps that barely registered over the idling engines around me. Through my side mirror, I could see a woman standing there, maybe mid-20s, wearing this oversized gray hoodie despite the heat, and jeans that looked too clean for someone who'd been dealing with car trouble. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she had these huge hoop earrings that caught the light from the parking lot's sodium lamps. Something about her posture seemed rehearsed, like an actress who'd memorized her blocking, but hadn't quite nailed the performance yet. She knocked again, harder this time, and called out in this high, sweet voice that carried a slight southern drawl, saying her car had broken down about a quarter mile up the road, and her phone was dead, and could I please help her call someone. The way she emphasized certain words felt calculated, like she was trying too hard to sound distressed without actually being distressed. Her hands stayed visible the whole time, pressed against my door like she wanted me to see she wasn't holding anything dangerous. I kept the door locked and rolled my window down another inch, just enough to talk without giving her any way to reach inside. From this angle, I could see more details. Her makeup was perfect, not a smudge of mascara despite claiming she'd walked here in the dark from a breakdown, and her white sneakers were pristine, not a speck of dust on them. She started rambling about how scared she was, alone out here at night. How she'd seen my cab light on and figured another woman would understand and help her out. Wouldn't leave her stranded in such a dangerous place. But while she was talking, her eyes kept darting to something beyond my truck, toward the back corner of the lot where the lights didn't quite reach. I adjusted my passenger mirror to get a better view, and that's when I saw them. 2 men standing by a dark sedan parked between 2 semi-trailers, maybe 60 yards away, just standing there perfectly still, watching us. One was tall and skinny, wearing what looked like a baseball cap, and the other was shorter, stockier, hands in his pockets, both of them positioned where they could move fast if they needed to. My heart started hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears, but I forced myself to stay calm and keep my face neutral. I told the woman I'd be happy to call someone for her from inside the truck stop, that she should go wait by the main entrance where it was well lit, and there were security cameras. She immediately switched tactics, her voice dropping the sweet act and becoming more insistent, saying she couldn't walk anymore because her ankle was twisted, that she really needed to sit down. Couldn't I just open the door and let her use my phone for one quick call? Her right hand moved to the door handle and gave it a testing pull while her left hand pressed flat against the window, leaving greasy fingerprints on the glass. That's when I noticed her nails, professionally done. These elaborate acrylic tips with tiny rhinestones. Definitely not the nails of someone who'd been struggling with a broken-down car on the side of the highway. She was getting agitated now, her voice rising, saying I was being paranoid and cruel, that women should help each other out, that she couldn't believe I was going to leave her out here alone when those creepy truckers inside had been making comments about her earlier. The two men had started moving, slowly walking toward my truck from different angles, trying to make it look casual but clearly coordinating their approach. The taller one was coming up along the passenger side while the shorter one circled wide to come up behind the trailer, probably thinking I couldn't see him in my mirrors. I reached over and grabbed my phone, making sure the woman could see me dialing, and loudly said I was calling 911 to report a stranded motorist who needed assistance. The change in her expression was instant. The fake desperation vanished and was replaced by this cold fury that made her look like a completely different person. She stepped back from the door and whistled, one sharp note that cut through the night air, and both men stopped in their tracks. Without another word, she turned and walked quickly toward the dark sedan, her supposed twisted ankle mysteriously healed. The men followed her, and within 30 seconds they were peeling out of the lot, tires squealing as they hit the access road. I sat there for probably 5 minutes, just shaking and trying to process what had almost happened. My shirt was soaked through with sweat that had nothing to do with the August heat, and I realized I'd been gripping my phone so tight that my knuckles were white and my fingers were cramping. Part of me wanted to just start driving, get the hell out of there and put miles between me and that place, but I knew I needed to report this before they tried it on someone else. I climbed down from my cab on wobbly legs and walked into the truck stop, heading straight for the counter where a kid who couldn't have been older than 20 was working the night shift. His name tag said Bradley, and he had this terrible attempt at a mustache and acne scars across both cheeks. When I told him what happened, his eyes went wide and he immediately called his manager over. This older woman named Dottie who'd probably been working truck stops since before I was born. She had silver hair and a tight bun and arms like a linebacker, and she listened to my story while pulling up security footage on a monitor behind the counter. Dottie's face went pale when she saw the footage, and she immediately called the state police while making a copy of the video files. Turns out this wasn't the first attempt. She told me they'd had 3 similar incidents in the past month, always late at night, always targeting solo drivers, especially women or elderly men. The woman with the blonde hair had been spotted each time, but she used different stories. Sometimes it was car trouble, sometimes she'd lost her wallet. Once she claimed she was escaping from an abusive boyfriend. The police arrived within 20 minutes, 2 officers who took my statement and watched the security footage several times, zooming in to get clear shots of the woman's face and the license plate of the sedan. They told me I'd done exactly the right thing by not opening my door, that 2 drivers had been robbed at knife point in similar setups at other stops along the interstate, and 1 elderly man had been beaten badly enough to need hospitalization when he'd tried to help what he thought was a stranded young mother with a baby. The officer, a sergeant named Ramirez with graying temples and a thick accent I couldn't quite place, showed me photos on his tablet of items recovered from one of the robbery scenes. There was a knife with a serrated edge about 6 inches long, zip ties that had been cut off a victim's wrists, and a roll of duct tape that made my stomach turn when I thought about what they might have planned to do with it. He said the woman was known to them only as Candy, from one victim who'd overheard the men use that name, though it was obviously fake, and they suspected the group was working their way along Interstate 40, hitting different truck stops every few weeks before moving on to avoid getting caught. The shorter man had a distinctive tattoo on his neck that one victim remembered, a scorpion with its tail curled up, and they'd been driving different vehicles each time, probably stolen or borrowed specifically for these robberies. Ramirez gave me his card and said a detective would follow up with me in a few days, that I might need to identify them in a lineup if they were caught, and he strongly suggested I consider carrying pepper spray or some other legal form of protection. After the police left, Dottie insisted on walking me back to my truck, this tough old woman marching beside me with a baseball bat she kept behind the counter, her eyes scanning the lot like a guard dog protecting its territory. She told me she'd been working that truck stop for 18 years and had seen all kinds of bad situations. But something about this crew particularly bothered her because they were getting bolder and more aggressive with each attempt. Before I climbed back into my cab, she grabbed my arm and told me to wait while she called over two other drivers she knew, regulars named Bill and Antoine, who often ran the same routes I did. They agreed to convoy with me for the next 100 miles until we reached a bigger city where I'd feel safer. And I've never been more grateful for the unspoken brotherhood among truckers who look out for each other. Bill drove an old International with Christmas lights strung around his cab year-round, and Antoine had this gorgeous black Western Star with chrome everything, and seeing them pull out ahead and behind me like protective escorts made me finally start breathing normally again. We drove through the rest of that night and into the morning, keeping a steady pace and checking in with each other on the CB every 30 minutes or so. Bill kept making these terrible jokes to keep my spirits up. Stuff about how that woman probably needed the money for acting lessons because her performance was garbage, while Antoine shared stories about close calls he'd had over his 20 years on the road. Around dawn, we stopped at a well-lit Love's truck stop near Oklahoma City, where they both insisted on checking my truck for any tracking devices the criminals might have stuck on it while I was distracted. Apparently, that was becoming a common tactic to follow victims to more isolated locations. They didn't find anything, but the fact that they thought to look showed just how sophisticated these robbery crews were becoming. Before we parted ways, Antoine gave me a small canister of bear spray he kept in his cab. Technically illegal to use on humans, but better than nothing. And Bill programmed his personal cell number into my phone with strict instructions to call if I ever felt unsafe at a stop again. I made it to Houston without any other incidents and delivered my load on schedule. But that night changed how I approach my job forever. Now I never work on paperwork with my cab light on at night. I use a small red flashlight that doesn't broadcast my location to everyone in the parking lot. I installed better locks on my doors and a security camera system that records everything around my truck, uploading to the cloud in case something happens to the physical equipment. I joined an online network of female truckers, where we share real-time updates about dangerous stops and suspicious situations, and I've helped 4 other women avoid similar setups by warning them about specific locations and tactics. About 6 months later, I got a call from that detective saying they'd arrested the crew in New Mexico after they'd tried the same scam on an off-duty cop who was driving his personal vehicle. The woman, whose real name turned out to be Ashley Donovan, got 7 years, and the 2 men got 12 each because of the weapons charges. But here's what still bothers me. During the trial, it came out that they'd successfully robbed at least 15 drivers before they were caught. And Ashley testified that they specifically targeted women drivers because, in her words, they're more likely to want to help another woman in distress. That feeling of betrayal, of having someone weaponize the instinct to help each other, that's what stays with me more than the fear. "6 years behind the wheel of a big rig teaches you a lot about solitude. That Monday in March 2023, I was pushing my 18-wheeler down Interstate 95, somewhere in that empty stretch between Jacksonville and Miami, with 40,000 pounds of electronics rattling in my trailer. Around 2 a.m., the highway becomes a different world, just truckers and the occasional speed demon racing toward morning. My wife Gloria always got anxious about these overnight runs, kept saying the darkness brought out the worst in people. I'd tell her she was being paranoid, that nothing ever happens on these long hauls except maybe seeing a gator crossing the road. God, how wrong I was. That particular stretch of I-95 runs through miles of nothing, swampland on both sides, no exits for 20 miles in either direction, just you and the hum of diesel and whatever's lurking out there in the Florida darkness. My whole world shifted with one violent explosion of rubber. The steering wheel jerked in my grip like it was trying to escape, and I felt the entire trailer swing sideways as the blown tire grabbed at the pavement. 40 tons of steel and cargo doesn't stop easy, especially when you're doing 65, and one of your trailer tires decides to shred itself to pieces. I fought that wheel with everything I had, pumping the brakes just enough to slow down without jackknifing, feeling the rig shudder and groan as I guided it toward the shoulder. When I finally got it stopped and climbed down with my flashlight, the damage was obvious. The tire wasn't just flat, it was destroyed. Long strips of rubber scattered across 200 feet of highway. The rim had carved a deep groove in the asphalt before I'd managed to stop. I set out my reflective triangles, knowing I was in for a long wait. Eddie from dispatch picked up on the second ring when I called, said the service truck would need at least 2 hours to reach me from Miami. As I ended the call, I caught movement in my mirror. Headlights approaching, slowing down, pulling off the road behind me. The car was a beat-up sedan, maybe a early 2000s Camry, painted that faded silver color that could have been any car anywhere. But something about how it parked bothered me. Not behind my truck where someone helping would stop, but at an angle, blocking any chance I had of pulling forward if I needed to leave quick. 2 men got out, and right away, every instinct I'd developed in 6 years of night driving started screaming. The driver was tall, maybe 6'3", wearing a baseball cap pulled low and a jacket too heavy for Florida, even at night. His passenger was shorter, stockier, with a beard that hadn't seen a trim in months and eyes that kept darting between me and my trailer. They walked toward me with this fake casualness, like they were trying too hard to seem helpful. The tall one raised his hand in a wave, smiled, showing too many teeth, and called out asking if I needed help. But his eyes weren't looking at me or the blown tire. They were locked on the trailer doors. "Rough night, huh?" the tall one said, his voice carrying that forced friendliness that makes your gut tighten. He introduced himself as Carl, said his buddy was Jerome, and they were heading home from a late shift at the port. But their clothes were too clean for dock workers, and there was no company logo on that sedan. Nothing that suggested they'd just finished any kind of honest work. Jerome walked past me toward the back of the trailer, running his hand along the side like he was checking for damage. But I knew he was feeling for the lock, testing how secure it was. Carl kept talking, asking what I was hauling, where I was headed, if anyone was expecting me soon. Each question felt like he was putting together a puzzle, figuring out how much time they had. When I mentioned Eddie knowing my exact location, and that the service truck had GPS tracking on my rig, Carl's expression flickered for just a second, a flash of calculation that told me everything I needed to know about why they'd really stopped. Jerome had made his way completely around the trailer by now, and I could hear him tugging at the lock mechanism, not even trying to be subtle anymore. The padlock I used was a heavy-duty Abus, one of those German-made ones that cost me nearly $200, but watching Jerome pull a small crowbar from inside his jacket made that investment seem pretty worthless. Carl saw me notice and stepped closer, close enough that I could smell stale cigarettes and something chemical on his breath, maybe meth. "Electronics, right?" he said, not really asking. "Bet there's what? Couple $100,000 worth of phones and laptops in there? That's a lot of weight for one man to be carrying all alone out here." His hand moved to his hip, pushing back his jacket just enough to show the handle of something tucked into his waistband. Not quite pulling it, but making sure I saw it. The math was simple. 2 of them, 1 of me, and the nearest help at least 90 minutes away. I started backing toward my cab, trying to keep it smooth, natural, like I was just going to check something. But Carl moved with me, maintaining that same uncomfortable distance, while Jerome gave up any pretense and started working the crowbar against the lock housing. "Where you going, driver?" Carl asked, his fake friendly tone completely gone now. "We're just trying to help you out here. Maybe we can work something out, you know. Insurance covers theft, right? You could say someone broke in while you were waiting for repairs. Hell, we could even rough you up a little, make it look good for the report." The way he said it, like he was doing me a favor, made my skin prickle with sweat despite the cool night air. I kept moving backward, my hand reaching behind me for the cab door handle, calculating whether I could get inside and lock it before Carl reached that weapon. Jerome had given up on the lock and was now examining the door hinges, and I realized with a sick feeling that they'd done this before, probably many times. My fingers found the door handle just as Carl lunged forward. I yanked it open and threw myself inside, slamming it shut as his fist connected with the window. The automatic locks engaged with a click that sounded like salvation. Carl's face pressed against the glass, no longer pretending to be anything but what he was, a predator who'd just lost his prey. He pulled out what I could now see was a Glock, tapping it against the window, almost playfully. "Bulletproof?" he asked, knowing damn well most truck windows aren't. But he didn't shoot. Out here, sound travels far, and even these two seemed to understand that gunshots would bring attention they didn't want. Jerome appeared on the passenger side, trying the door handle, then picked up a rock from the shoulder. I grabbed my phone, hand steady now that I had steel between us, and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered just as Jerome threw the rock. The passenger window spiderwebbed but held, thank God for laminated glass. "Break-in in progress, Interstate 95 southbound, mile marker 247, I said, loud enough for Carl and Jerome to hear every word. "Two men trying to break into my truck and steal my cargo, armed with a handgun." The dispatcher started asking questions, and I kept my voice clear and steady, describing Carl and Jerome, their sedan, reading off the license plate I'd memorized when they first pulled up. Carl's face changed as he realized I wasn't just calling for help. I was creating a record, evidence, turning them from anonymous thieves into wanted men with descriptions and a paper trail. Jerome dropped the rock and backed away from the truck, yelling something at Carl I couldn't make out over the diesel engine's idle. Through the dispatcher, I could hear radio chatter as units were contacted. "Closest unit is about 15 minutes out," she said, and I watched Carl's jaw clench as he heard it too. 15 minutes isn't long unless you're trying to break into a locked trailer and get away with $200,000 in electronics. Carl made one last attempt, walking around to the driver's side again, the gun now tucked away. He knocked on the window almost politely, gesturing for me to roll it down. When I shook my head, he leaned close to the glass and spoke just loud enough for me to hear. "You got lucky tonight, driver. But you know what? We know your truck number. We know what company you drive for. Trucks break down all the time on these empty stretches. Maybe next time you won't be so lucky." The threat hung in the air between us, and for a moment I actually considered whether reporting this was worth potentially becoming a target. But then I saw Jerome already heading back to their sedan, clearly not interested in being there when the cops arrived. Carl held my stare for another few seconds, memorizing my face the same way I'd memorized his, then slowly backed away. They didn't peel out or drive erratically. They just pulled back onto the highway and disappeared into the darkness, probably taking the next exit to disappear into the maze of back roads. I stayed on with the dispatcher until I saw the blue and red lights approaching from the north. 2 state troopers pulled up, both of them taking the situation seriously once they saw the damaged window and the marks on my trailer lock. Officer Daniels, a woman who looked like she'd seen every scam and scheme this highway had to offer, took my statement while her partner photographed everything. She told me I'd done everything right, stayed in the cab, called immediately, got good descriptions. "That license plate you gave us," she said, checking her tablet. Stolen from a parking lot in Orlando 3 days ago. These guys are professionals. She gave me her card, said a detective would follow up. But we both knew the chances of catching Carl and Jerome were slim. They'd probably already ditched the car and the plates. What stuck with me, though, was when she mentioned they'd had 4 similar incidents in the last month, all targeting trucks with electronic cargo, all along this same stretch of I-95. The service truck finally arrived about 20 minutes after the cops left, and I watched the mechanic change my tire while replaying everything in my head. He made small talk about how dangerous this stretch of road had gotten, mentioned he'd been called out to 3 suspicious breakdowns just that week. That detail made me wonder, were Carl and Jerome somehow causing the flats? It wouldn't be hard to scatter some debris on the road, wait for a truck to hit it, then follow at a distance until the driver pulled over. The mechanic, a guy named Luis who'd been doing this for 20 years, said he'd started carrying pepper spray after one call-out turned sketchy. By the time I got rolling again, it was nearly 5 a.m., and the sky was starting to lighten in the east. I made my delivery in Miami, but I couldn't stop checking my mirrors, looking for that silver sedan or any car that seemed to be following too close. The warehouse workers unloaded those electronics like any other day, completely unaware that their phones and laptops had almost ended up on the black market. I still drive that route, but everything's different now. Got myself a concealed carry permit the week after the incident, and I keep a loaded .38 in the cab, legal and registered. The company installed better locks on all their trailers, the kind that would take a lot more than a crowbar to break. But the biggest change is internal. That comfortable feeling of solitude I used to enjoy on night drives is gone, replaced by a constant vigilance that exhausts me more than the long hours ever did. Gloria was right about the darkness bringing out the worst in people. Sometimes I think about Carl's threat, wonder if he and Jerome are still out there, watching for truck number 4847 to break down again. The state police never caught them, and those incidents along I-95 continued for another 2 months before suddenly stopping. Maybe they got arrested for something else, or maybe they just moved their operations somewhere else. All I know is that every time I hear that telltale thump of a tire problem, my hand instinctively moves toward that. 38, and I'm already scanning for the nearest exit, the closest place with lights and people, because I learned that night that on these empty highways, you're never really alone. And that's exactly the problem. "22 years of driving freight across the country shows you things they don't cover in trucking school. I was 51 when this happened, driving refrigerated goods from Chicago to Pittsburgh in my old Kenworth that I'd bought used 5 years earlier. My wife Karen always worried about me driving alone at night, especially after our son moved out to college, leaving just the 2 of us and our German Shepherd, Duke, at home. I'd been making the same run twice a month for nearly 3 years, knew every rest stop, every way station, every damn pothole on that route. That particular morning in early May, I'd left the distribution center around 2 a.m., hoping to beat the morning rush through the city. The weather was perfect, clear skies with just enough moonlight to see the farmland stretching out on both sides of the interstate. Everything about that night felt routine, normal even, right up until I reached that overpass outside Fort Wayne. About an hour into Indiana, there's this old concrete overpass that crosses the highway. One of those ancient things from the 60s with rust stains running down the pillars like dried blood. No exit ramps, no connecting roads that I could see anymore. Just this bridge sitting there in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by abandoned cornfields and the occasional collapsed barn. As I approached it doing about 65, my headlights caught something up on the bridge. A person just standing there at the railing, looking straight down at the traffic. Now I'd seen people on overpasses before, usually kids throwing rocks or idiots taking pictures. But this was different. This person wasn't moving at all, just standing perfectly still with their arms at their sides. wearing what looked like dark coveralls, or maybe a mechanic's jumpsuit. The way they tracked my cab as I passed underneath gave me this uncomfortable twist in my gut, like when you catch someone staring at you through a window. Their head turned slowly, following my movement with this unnatural precision that made every hair on my arm stand up. I'd already passed under the bridge when I heard it, this heavy thud that shook the whole trailer, like someone had dropped a sandbag from height. The impact was strong enough that I felt it through the driver's seat, that vibration traveling through the fifth wheel connection right into the cab. My first thought was maybe a chunk of concrete had fallen from the deteriorating overpass. Happens sometimes with these old bridges. But then came another sound, a scraping noise that started at the back of the trailer and moved forward, metal on metal, like someone dragging a crowbar across the roof. I checked my mirrors but couldn't see anything in the darkness behind me. The scraping continued for maybe 10 seconds, stopped, then started again, this time accompanied by what sounded like footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps walking along the top of my 53-foot trailer while I was doing 65 miles per hour down the interstate. My CB radio crackled to life, startling me bad enough that I jerked the wheel slightly. "Northbound Kenworth, you got company up top," came a voice. Probably another trucker heading south who'd seen something in his headlights as we passed. Before I could grab the mic to respond, the walking sounds stopped, replaced by a rhythmic banging near the front of the trailer, right behind my cab. 3 measured hits, pause, 3 more hits, like someone knocking to get my attention. I white-knuckled the steering wheel, trying to focus on the road while my mind raced through possibilities. Maybe some crazy person had actually jumped from that overpass, but surviving that fall onto a moving truck seemed impossible. The nearest rest area was 12 miles ahead according to the green highway sign that flashed past, and I made the decision right there to pull over as soon as possible, even though every instinct told me to keep driving, to not stop until I reached somewhere populated and well lit. Those 12 miles felt like 12 hours. The noises on the roof had stopped completely after the knocking, which somehow made everything worse. The silence meant I didn't know where this person was anymore, if they were still up there, waiting, or if they'd somehow gotten off. I kept checking my mirrors obsessively, looking for any movement, any shadow that didn't belong. Other vehicles passed me going faster, their headlights briefly illuminating my trailer, but nobody else called out on the CB. I thought about calling 911, but what would I say? Someone might be on my truck? By the time cops arrived, whoever it was would be long gone. The rest area finally appeared in my headlights, one of those big modern stops with multiple parking areas for trucks and cars, bright LED lights everywhere, and a welcome center that stayed open 24 hours. I pulled into the truck parking section, choosing a spot right under one of the brightest light poles, surrounded by other rigs with drivers probably sleeping in their cabs. Before getting out, I grabbed the tire iron I kept behind my seat and my heavy-duty flashlight, the kind that doubles as a club if needed. I sat there for a full minute, engine idling, just listening and watching. Nothing moved outside except the occasional flutter of trash in the wind. Finally, I opened my door and stepped down, keeping my back against the cab while I scanned the area. The parking lot was mostly quiet, just the hum of diesel engines and refrigeration units from other trucks. I walked around to the passenger side first, shining my light up at the trailer roof from different angles, looking for anyone who might still be hiding up there. Nothing. Then I noticed the ladder at the back of my trailer. The metal rungs were slightly bent, like someone heavy had climbed them recently. I always did my pre-trip inspections thoroughly, and those rungs had been perfectly straight when I'd left Chicago. My mouth went dry as I realized whoever had been on that overpass had definitely made it onto my truck. I climbed up those bent rungs carefully, my flashlight clenched between my teeth while I gripped the tire iron in one hand. When my head cleared the edge of the trailer roof, I swept the light across the surface. The entire top was covered in long, deep scratches in the aluminum, like claw marks but made with something metal. They formed a path from the back all the way to the front, exactly where I'd heard the footsteps, near the front edge, right above where my cab would be. There were handprints in what looked like motor oil or grease, perfectly visible against the silver metal. But what really made my stomach turn were the dents, 5 or 6 deep impressions where someone had been striking the roof with something heavy. In the center of one dent, wedged into the damaged metal, was a railroad spike. Not hammered in, just pushed hard enough to stick there like a calling card. I pulled it free and noticed something wrapped around it, a piece of paper, grimy and torn, with an address written in pencil, a truck stop about 40 miles ahead on my route. The smart thing would have been to call the police right then, show them the damage, file a report, but part of me needed to know who this person was, what they wanted. I climbed back down and walked through the rest area, showing the paper to other drivers, asking if they'd heard about anything strange at that address. One older driver, a guy with a gray beard down to his chest, went pale when he saw it. He told me that truck stop had been closed for 2 years after a driver was killed there, beaten to death with a piece of rebar during a robbery. The killer was never caught, but truckers had been reporting weird encounters on this stretch of highway ever since. Someone jumping onto trucks from overpasses trying to get drivers to stop. The theory was the killer was still working the route, looking for victims, using the abandoned truck stop as some kind of base. The driver advised me to forget the address, report the incident, and take a different route next time. But he also said something that chilled me. Check your trailer doors. Sometimes they try to get inside while you're driving. I practically ran to the back of my trailer, flashlight bouncing wildly as I moved. The seal was broken, the numbered metal seal that the warehouse had put on in Chicago, the one I'd verified and logged in my paperwork, was cut clean through and hanging by a thread. My refrigerated load of medical supplies, worth about $200,000, was now compromised. But that wasn't what made me step back. The door handle had bloody fingerprints on it, fresh enough that they were still tacky to the touch. I yanked the door open, ready to swing the tire iron at anyone inside. The cold air rushed out, fog billowing into the night, and my flashlight beam cut through it to reveal the cargo. Shifted. Several pallets had been pushed aside, creating a narrow path to the back wall. On the floor, made from what looked like old moving blankets and a torn tarp, was a makeshift bed, empty food cans, water bottles, and worst of all, a bucket in the corner that had clearly been used as a toilet. Someone had been living in my trailer, possibly for hours, maybe since before I'd even left Chicago. Next to the makeshift bed was a backpack, military surplus style, covered in dirt, and what looked like dried blood. Against every instinct, I opened it. Inside were driver's licenses, at least a dozen of them, all from different states, all truck drivers based on the CDL markings. I recognized one face from a missing person poster I'd seen at a truck stop in Indiana 2 weeks ago. There were also car keys, wedding rings, watches, and wallets, trophies. At the bottom of the bag was a journal, pages filled with cramped handwriting describing trucks, routes, times, and driver descriptions. My truck number was there, my route, even details about my usual schedule. The last entry, dated that morning, simply read, 51, alone, predictable tonight. I heard gravel crunch behind me, footsteps approaching slowly, deliberately. When I spun around, a man stood about 10 feet away, thin but muscular, wearing those same dark coveralls I'd seen on the overpass. His face was gaunt, hollow cheeks and deep-set eyes that reflected my flashlight like an animal's. In his hand was a piece of rebar, rusty and bent, with something dark staining one end. We stood there for what felt like forever but was probably only a few seconds, neither of us moving, both calculating. Then he smiled, showing teeth that were broken and gray, and took a step forward. That's when my 22 years of trucking experience kicked in. I didn't try to fight him with the tire iron. Instead, I reached up and yanked the strap release for the load lock bar above the door, a heavy aluminum pole that keeps cargo from shifting. It crashed down between us with a metallic clang that echoed through the parking lot. The noise and sudden movement made him step back just for a second. but that was all I needed. I slammed both trailer doors shut, trapping him inside, and immediately shoved the tire iron through the door handles, locking them from the outside. He hit the doors from inside, hard enough to bow them outward, screaming words I couldn't understand, just pure rage. I grabbed my phone and called 911, backing away from the trailer while keeping my flashlight trained on those buckling doors. Other truckers had heard the commotion and started coming over, surrounding the trailer, making sure he couldn't escape if he somehow broke through. The police arrived within 8 minutes, 4 patrol cars and a K9 unit. They surrounded my trailer with weapons drawn while I explained everything, showed them the journal, the IDs, the evidence. When they finally opened those doors, he came out swinging that rebar, but the officers were ready. It took 3 of them to get him on the ground and cuffed. His name was Leonard Voss, wanted in 4 states for murder, robbery, and assault. He'd been living like this for 3 years, jumping from overpasses onto trucks, either robbing drivers at rest stops or living in their trailers until the perfect moment to strike. The police found the remains of 2 missing drivers at that abandoned truck stop address he'd written down, buried in shallow graves behind the building. I had to spend the rest of the night giving statements, watching them process my trailer as a crime scene. The company sent another driver to finish my route while I drove my empty cab home. I couldn't stop thinking about all those IDs in his bag, all those drivers who hadn't been as lucky. Karen made me take a month off after that, and when I went back to work, I switched to day runs only, local routes where I could be home every night. I still drive, but I never pass under an overpass without checking my mirrors, and I always double-check my trailer seals, even at stops I know are safe. That piece of rebar they took as evidence still shows up in my dreams sometimes, along with those hollow eyes reflecting my flashlight beam in the darkness. I remember pulling into that little rest area sometime after midnight, the kind of place you only notice when you're desperate for a break. The lot was nearly empty, just a handful of trucks scattered like sleeping animals, a row of flickering lights along the restroom building, and the hum of a soda machine echoing through the stillness. My eyelids felt heavy from the miles behind me, and I figured a few hours in the sleeper would keep me sharp for the next stretch. After parking, I locked the doors, pulled the curtains, and stretched out, telling myself I'd be out cold in minutes. The silence there wasn't peaceful. It had a weight to it, like the world had stopped moving. I could hear every creak of the truck settling, every faint rustle of wind sliding over the cab. I left my boots by the step, flashlight within reach, and let the quiet wrap around me. It didn't take long before I drifted into that hazy state between sleep and awareness, where your mind still picks up on sounds, even if you're not fully awake. That's when the first knock came. It was a sharp, solid bang against the driver's side door. The sound rattled straight through the cab, jolting me upright. I yanked the curtain aside, expecting to catch someone standing there, a cop, maybe another driver asking for help. But the space outside was empty. The pavement stretched out under the lamps. The other truck stood motionless, and no one was near enough to have made that sound. I sat frozen for a long minute, waiting for movement, but the lot stayed dead quiet. Just as I started convincing myself it could have been the metal cooling, another knock slammed against the opposite side of the cab. This time it was louder, more deliberate, like someone had walked around and chosen the other door just to mess with me. Then came footsteps. Slow, steady crunches in the gravel, tracing a circle around the truck. I held my breath, straining to follow the sound as it moved from one corner to the next, as if someone was deliberately making sure I knew they were there. I slid into the driver's seat without even realizing it, my pulse hammering in my ears. The footsteps had stopped, but the silence that followed was even worse, like whoever was out there was waiting for me to make the next move. I gripped the steering wheel, debating whether to hit the horn and wake the whole place up, or just sit perfectly still and pretend I wasn't inside. My mouth was dry, and every second that ticked by made me more certain someone was standing just out of sight, staring at the cab. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I twisted the key and the headlights blasted across the lot, bleaching everything in harsh white light. For a split second, the beams cut across the restroom building, the vending machines, and the handful of parked rigs. Nothing moved. Not a shadow. Not a person darting away. The lot was empty, eerily, impossibly empty, considering what I'd just heard circling me. But then my eyes dropped lower, and that's when I saw them. Boot prints pressed deep into the dirt right below my door. They weren't old or faded, not washed out by weather. They were fresh, edges crisp, the tread pattern sharp like they'd been stamped there seconds ago. The trail led straight up from the edge of the lot, stopped exactly at my step, and went nowhere else. No exit, no turn back, nothing. Just an ending at the base of my truck. I sat there frozen in the glow of the lights, staring at those prints until my vision blurred. There was no way someone could have walked up, knocked, circled, and then vanished into thin air without me catching even a flicker of movement. Yet the evidence was staring me in the face. Every instinct screamed at me to get out of that place. So I threw the truck in gear, not caring how little rest I'd had. The engine roared, and I pulled back onto the highway, leaving the rest area shrinking in my mirrors. The prints burned into my memory. The drive that followed was one of the longest of my life. Every shadow along the shoulder looked like it could peel away into a figure. Every overpass felt like a place someone might be waiting. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see someone trailing me on foot, which made no sense, but my nerves wouldn't let the thought go. By the time I reached the next truck stop with more lights and people around, my chest was tight from holding it all in. I parked under the brightest lamp I could find and stayed awake until dawn, too wired to close my eyes again. The strangest part is that when I finally stepped out in the morning, the side of my cab was spotless. No mud, no scuffs, no sign of anyone pressing against it. But I couldn't shake what I'd seen. The prints lined up in the dirt, perfectly fresh, ending right at my door like whoever made them had climbed inside. Except I knew every lock was still engaged, and I'd been alone the whole time. I told a couple of drivers I trust about it later, and they just gave me that look like they weren't sure if I'd nodded off and dreamed the whole thing. But the detail that sticks with me, the tread pattern on those boots, I remember it clear as day. They weren't generic work boots like you'd expect out there. The soles had this deep zigzag design, almost like military issue, and the steps were evenly spaced, like someone walking with calm, steady purpose. That's not the kind of thing my brain would just invent in the middle of the night. To this day, I avoid smaller rest areas when I'm running late at night. I'll push myself to make it to a bigger stop, even if it means losing an hour of sleep. I never heard those knocks again, never saw more prints like that, but I can't unsee what I saw that night. If anyone asks why I hate sleeping in the dark, empty lots, that's the reason. Because once you've had something walk right up to your door in the dead of night, circle your truck and vanish without a trace, you don't ever really rest easy again. Most truckers have a handful of roads they never forget, and for me, Route 19 has always been one of them. It cuts through the mountains in a way that feels unnatural, like the asphalt was forced onto rock that didn't want to be touched. The nights are long out there, no radio signal, no glow of towns in the distance, just black ridges against a darker sky. On that particular run, I had the cab window cracked, letting in air that smelled like wet pine and cold stone. My headlights carved out a narrow tunnel ahead, the rest of the world swallowed by shadows. The curve had been on my mind even before I reached it. Everyone knew it was the kind of bend that demanded respect, the kind where you eased down whether you wanted to or not. I could feel the road sloping, my trailer tugging faintly behind me as the grade tilted. I tapped the brakes and watched the speedometer drop, telling myself I'd be through it in less than a minute. The engine's steady growl was the only company I had, and even that sounded muted, like the mountain itself was pressing down on me. That's when the flashing lights appeared, red, sharp, pulsing in the dark. A car sat crosswise in the middle of the lane, hazard lights flickering in a steady rhythm that looked almost too perfect. The body of the car looked crumpled, nose dipped low, and the windshield reflected the glare like shattered glass. My foot hit the brake harder than I meant to, the trailer pulling at an angle that made the steering wheel fight back. The whole rig lurched and groaned, tires screaming against the pavement, until I managed to stop just short of plowing into the wreck. I killed the hazards on my own truck and grabbed the door handle, adrenaline already buzzing through me. The air outside was colder than it had been minutes earlier, sharp in my throat as I jumped down from the cab. My boots hit the asphalt and I jogged toward the wreck, ready to yell out to anyone inside. But before I even got close enough to touch it, the sight made me skid to a halt. The road was empty. No car, no blinking hazards, not even debris. Only the thick smell of rubber and the jagged streaks of skid marks trailing across the lane where I'd braked. I stood there breathing hard, my pulse loud in my ears, staring at empty pavement that seconds earlier had been blocked by a wreck. The skid marks were real. I could trace the black streaks with my eyes all the way back to my rig. But there was nothing else. No shards of glass, no twisted bumper, not even a faint glint of metal in the headlights. I muttered something to myself, more out of disbelief than fear, and walked a few paces up and down the lane just to prove I wasn't losing it. The mountains around me were silent in a way that didn't feel natural. Normally you'd hear at least a whisper of wind through the trees or the groan of a truck engine echoing from somewhere far off. But there was nothing. The only sound came from my own truck idling behind me, hazard lights blinking slow and steady like it was mocking what I'd just seen. My breath fogged in the air as I crouched down to touch the asphalt, feeling the rough grooves where rubber had burned into the road. That was the part that unsettled me most. Those marks weren't just mine. Another set ran at an angle across the curve, thinner, lighter, but fresh. I turned back toward the cab, half expecting to see headlights cresting the hill, or maybe even the wreck reappearing in the dark. My hands gripped the metal rail as I climbed back in, trying to decide if I should call highway patrol or just keep driving. A part of me worried someone might have run off the road down into the ravine, but when I aimed my flashlight over the edge, it only revealed endless rock and trees swallowing the beam whole. If there was a car down there, it was buried deeper than I could see. Sitting behind the wheel again, I couldn't shake the image of those blinking hazard lights. They'd seemed too bright, too even, almost like a signal meant to pull me in. The longer I thought about it, the more I wondered if I'd slammed on the brakes for something that was never really there. But the marks on the asphalt said otherwise, and that was enough to keep me gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual as I eased the truck back into gear and crept through the rest of the curve. The descent on the other side of the curve stretched out longer than I remembered, the road winding like a snake through the black hills. Every shadow in my mirrors looked alive, like something might be following me just out of sight. I kept the rig steady, hands clamped on the wheel, headlights catching nothing but endless pavement and guardrails. After a few miles, the tension began to wear me down, and I finally reached for the CB just to hear my own voice. The static that answered back was sharp, like a hiss in my ear, before fading into dead air again. I tried focusing on the rhythm of the drive, letting the hum of the engine take over, but the image of those hazard lights kept replaying. They hadn't blinked irregularly the way damaged cars usually do. Those flashes were too exact, like a metronome ticking in the dark. I couldn't stop wondering if someone else had seen the same thing, maybe even slammed on their brakes like me, leaving their own marks behind. The thought made the road feel heavier, as if every mile carried stories I'd never want to know. When I finally pulled into a small gas stop hours later, I asked another driver if he'd ever noticed anything strange near that curve. The guy, an older hauler with deep lines on his face, didn't hesitate. He told me plenty of people had reported accidents there, but by the time help arrived, there was never a car to be found, just skid marks. He said it plain, without theatrics, like he'd heard it a dozen times before. Then he shook his head, told me to take it slow through there from now on, and went back to sipping his coffee. I've driven that stretch of Route 19 more times since, and I still slow down every single time I approach the bend. The skid marks fade and new ones appear, always crisscrossing the asphalt like reminders left behind. I never saw those hazard lights again, but I don't think I need to. Once was enough. Whatever I encountered that night, it left me with one truth I can't shake. Sometimes the most dangerous thing on the road isn't what's really there. It's what you think you see.